Margaery Tyrell stood by a tall window of the Red Keep, gazing down at the bustling city of King's Landing as the afternoon light cast shifting shadows across the winding streets. Her heart felt heavier than she cared to admit. Days had passed since the gruesome death of Prince Oberyn Martell in trial by combat against the monstrous Ser Gregor Clegane, and King's Landing was still caught up in a swirl of shock, gossip, and vengeance. The Red Viper's dramatic end had cemented something Margaery had long suspected. The Lannisters would not hesitate to play with the lives of powerful allies so long as it served their cause. The smell of roses from the courtyard gardens, lovingly kept by silent servants, wafted through the open window. It almost comforted her, reminding her of Highgarden and of the smiles her grandmother Olenna had always worn. But there was a tension beyond the walls that she couldn't ignore. King's Landing was more dangerous than ever. Tywin Lannister's hold on the city was absolute in theory. He was Hand of the King to the young Tommen Baratheon, Margaery's newlywed husband. But the cunning she had inherited from House Tyrell told her that House Martell would not let this murder go unanswered. The Red Viper was beloved in Dorne. Oberyn's thirst for Lannister blood was well known, and now he was dead, in the most horrific and public of ways. Surely that would not sit well in Sunspear. She touched the window frame, feeling the rough stone. Her thoughts moved swiftly. There had been friction. House Tyrell was second in wealth only to House Lannister, and the Tyrells were vital to the crown's hold over the Reach and its harvest. The marriage alliances had placed Margaery at the center of court intrigue. Yet despite her privileged position, she had watched her father, Mace Tyrell, bow and scrape to the Lord Hand as though House Tyrell existed solely at the pleasure of the Lannisters. They played the game just as everyone else in King's Landing had to. But Margaery felt a shift within herself the day Oberyn died. The Lannisters' capacity for cruelty, in this instance channeled through the Savage Mountain, was impossible to ignore. She remembered Oberyn's fiery eyes at the feast, remembered the hush that fell over the throne room when he had entered. She felt regret not only for the man and what he might have done for Dorne, but for the potential that a friendly alliance with House Martell might have offered. Married to Tommen or not, she understood the precariousness of her situation. Tommen was gentle, but he was a boy, and his mother, Queen Cersei, was only too happy to remind everyone that Margaery was an outsider from the Reach. Olenna Tyrell, the Queen of Thorns, had taught her granddaughter that survival at court was as delicate as threading a needle in a storm. And Margaery Tyrell, resolute and clever, was ready to do more than survive. A soft rap on the chamber door alerted her. She turned as Ser Loras Tyrell, her brother, handsome, proud, and still wearing the formal attire of his station as a member of the Kingsguard, slipped inside. His pale cloak was immaculate, though his face was drawn tight. "You asked me to come, sister," he said in a hushed voice, mindful of the prying ears that might lurk in any corridor. "Is something amiss?" She crossed the room, letting the sunlight catch the delicate gold roses embroidered on her gown. "Yes, though perhaps not in a way we can speak of loudly. Loras, I must know, how stands King's Landing after the trial by combat? Word is that Prince Doran Martell is furious. The entire city is waiting for Dorne's reaction." Loras's mouth flattened. Prince Oberyn was well respected. Dorne will not forget, and the crown's official story is that he died honorably defending Tyrion's life, but no one believes it. Everyone knows he died against Ser Gregor, who was championing father's cause. And in a manner so gruesome, well, it does not reflect kindly on any of us, does it? She shook her head. The Lannisters have foolishly sown resentment. They rely on us, Loras, but you know as well as I that our father is too dazzled by titles. He kneels at Tywin Lannister's feet, eager to be told how indispensable he is. I fear that if House Tyrell does not begin to carve its own future, we'll be dragged down when the Lannisters inevitably meet their ruin. She paused, measuring her brother's reaction. "So let me ask you, do you have any sense of Dorne's immediate intentions? Do they plan an uprising? Or will they feign docility until an opportunity arises?" Loras shifted uncomfortably, running a hand through his golden curls. "I've heard rumors the Martell envoy has been sending ravens from the palace rookery daily. Furious messages, no doubt. I also heard Ilaria Sand left the city soon after Oberyn's body was turned over to his retinue. She was inconsolable, and there was no attempt to hide her contempt for the crown. If I had to guess, Prince Dorne will wait for a formal apology or some gesture of recompense. Margaery studied the set of her brother's jaw. We both know the Lannisters will never give genuine recompense. They might offer meaningless condolences, but nothing that will mend Oberyn's spilled blood. Cersei is too proud, and Tywin too cold. They believe power is paramount, and that vengeance is secondary. Loras's eyes flicked to the closed door, then back at her. What would you have me do, sister? Speak to them in the shadows? Risk your position or father's or... She cut him off with a raised hand. Hush, my dear brother. I only need your eyes at the moment. If Dorne is on the cusp of rising, we need to know when. We need to understand their grievances beyond Oberyn's death and how far they will go to avenge him. We Tyrells may be forced to choose our alliances carefully. Loras swallowed. You speak as if you'd consider turning on the crown. That may be the least of it, she said with a sad, quiet smile. But it is a bridge we cannot cross publicly. This must be done in secret, if it is done at all. He nodded, then stepped forward, lowering his voice even further. Be careful, he whispered. Cersei has spies everywhere. Margaery's gaze flicked to the half-open window, aware that a stray servant might be lingering in the courtyard below. She reached out and touched her brother's arm. I will be as careful as the wind in a rose garden, she said. But for now, keep watch. And if you hear anything at all about a Dornish movement or potential alliance, tell me before you speak with anyone else. With that, Loras squeezed her hand and slipped out of the chamber. Margaery turned back to the window, her thoughts spinning a delicate tapestry of possibility. War had loomed large over Westeros for too long. The War of the Five Kings had drenched the land in blood, but it hadn't ended all grudges. There were many scores yet to settle. She closed her eyes and pictured Dorne's blazing sun and spear. The Martells hated the Lannisters. If they were to move against King's Landing, who would stand in their way? Who might aid them? Perhaps, she whispered to herself, it is time for a new alliance, an alliance of roses and sun. Word of Tywin Lannister's continuing negotiations with Prince Doran Martell did nothing to quell the tension Margaery felt each passing day. She played her part with perfect politeness in court, smiling demurely at Tommen, offering subtle compliments to the king's mother, and winning favor with nobles by hosting small luncheons in the gardens of the Red Keep. She was well acquainted with the game. To remain above suspicion, she had to be what everyone expected, a charming, gracious queen consort to the boy king. But behind that polished exterior, her mind worked tirelessly. She enlisted a discreet retinue of trusted ladies-in-waiting, each loyal to House Tyrell first. Some were younger cousins from the Reach, carefully chosen for their ability to keep a secret. Others were older companions who had come from Highgarden. All were adept at blending into the throng of courtiers that crowded the halls. They might look like they were gossiping idly about the latest fashion or the newest rumor from the free cities, but their real purpose was to glean whispers of discontent. Any mention of Dorne's stance, any mention of what the Martell envoys said or did, was relayed directly to Margaery. It was through them that she first learned of a curious arrangement of letters. A hush had spread through the court. Prince Doran was sending personal messages to several high lords in the Reach. The contents were unknown, but the letters bypassed Tywin Lannister's scrutiny entirely. Could Doran be looking for allies among the Tyrell bannermen? Could it be that Dorne, still furious over the death of their beloved prince, was seeking to drive a wedge between the Reach and the Westerlands? Late one evening, in the flickering candlelight of her private solar, Margaery sat at a small table strewn with tiny morsels, sugared plums and spiced wine, and read over a note one of her ladies had delivered. The letter was coded with a simple cipher they'd agreed upon, but the gist was clear. House Hightower of Oldtown had received a messenger from Dorne. The banner lords of the Reach had not publicly announced anything, but House Hightower was certainly listening. Margaery felt a small thrill of relief and apprehension. The Martells were making moves. There was a soft rustle at the door before it opened. Olenna Tyrell, the Queen of Thorns, stepped inside with her measured, almost regal gait. An elderly handmaiden stood by the door to ensure their privacy. Margaery stood, curtsied to her grandmother in a show of affection, and offered the older woman a seat. Olenna took a moment to settle, scanning the room with hawk-like precision. "I trust you've heard the rumors," she said, her tone sharper than the edge of a fresh blade. "Dorne is sending ravens to half the lords in Westeros, it seems." Margaery nodded. "Yes, grandmother. I suspect Prince Doran is testing the waters, seeing who might be receptive to a separate arrangement. Father continues to act the loyal subject to Lord Tywin, but that won't last if there's a real shift in power." Olenna rolled her eyes. "Your father is a proud fool, but not an idiot. The Lannisters have lost their hold on the north. The Iron Islands remain restless, and now Dorne is furious. I suspect Tywin is searching for a way to rein Dorne in, but I doubt Prince Doran is easily cowed." Margaery pressed her lips together. "We Tyrells could be pivotal in any conflict. Dorne may seek to court us. The question is, do we risk everything and consider an alliance with the Martells? If we do, we betray the crown, at least in the eyes of the Lannisters." The Queen of Thorns let out a dry laugh. "Betraying the Lannisters is a risky business. But child, the Lannisters would betray us in half a heartbeat if it secured their position. Do not forget that. Tywin's sense of duty goes only as far as it preserves House Lannister's name. If it came down to saving his grandchildren or sacrificing Highgarden, we can guess which choice he'd make." She reached over and patted Margaery's arm with surprising gentleness. "Your father does not have the necessary steel, but you and I might. If Dorne wants to talk, we should listen." Margaery summoned her courage. "They do want to talk, grandmother, or so I suspect. I must find a way to communicate with Prince Doran, or someone he trusts implicitly. Oberyn's paramour, Illyria Sand, might be too stricken with grief, but it's possible she's fueling the flames of vengeance. Or the Sand Snakes, Oberyn's daughters, might now be the driving force." Olenna raised an eyebrow. "This is delicate. No matter how we manage it, we risk being discovered. Cersei is not cunning enough to unravel every secret, but she has her ways. And don't forget about Varys the Spider. He weaves his webs across half the world." Margaery nodded, a slight crease forming in her brow. "I'll be careful, grandmother. If the Martells are serious, we can open a channel through a trusted intermediary. Someone who travels between King's Landing and Sunspear, but who can keep secrets." "Good." Olenna sighed and massaged her knuckles. "I'll make arrangements as well. We have eyes and ears in the city, but we must be subtle as snakes. For now, let the Lannisters think we remain loyal. Let them see your smiles, hear your soft words. We must not show our hand until the moment is right." After she departed, Margaery remained awake, pacing by the window, thinking of the wide deserts of Dorne, the water gardens, the vow of vengeance that any Martell must surely be whispering in secret. She pictured an alliance that might topple the Lannisters. If she succeeded, could House Tyrell finally rise to true prominence? Could she secure Tommen's well-being in some manner and protect him from Cersei's malice? She closed her eyes, letting herself imagine, just for a moment, a realm where the Tyrell rose and the Martell spear stood side by side against the Golden Lion. The opportunity came sooner than expected. A fortnight later, word arrived that a small Dornish party was returning to King's Landing, presumably to continue official negotiations with Lord Tywin regarding the crown's future relationship with Dorne. Margaery's ladies whispered that among them was one of Oberyn's daughters, Tyene Sand, rumored to have a silver tongue and a knowledge of poisons that rivaled her father's. It was risky to approach her directly, but Margaery saw an opening. If she could discreetly pass a message to Tyene, she might open the door to conversation with Prince Doran. The day dawned bright and hot, with a golden sun that reminded Margaery of Dorne's banner. She dressed carefully, choosing a pale green gown embroidered with golden roses at the sleeves, and pinned her hair in a demure style so it wouldn't seem like she was trying to overshadow the guests. The Dornish party arrived by the great gates, led by a lithe young woman with pale blonde hair that curled around a face as sweet as honey. That same woman had the name Tyene Sand on the lips of every courtier. Margaery greeted them, flanked by Loras and a handful of gold cloaks. She spoke with polished courtesy, offering them a place to rest after their journey and refreshments in the shade of the castle courtyard. Tyene curtsied with a smile, but Margaery could see the edge of bitterness in her bright blue eyes. The other Dornishmen were similarly polite yet distant. They had lost Oberyn. Their grief radiated from them in subtle ways. Margaery allowed them a moment to dismount and be led inside. She lingered behind momentarily, exchanging looks with Loras, who offered a faint nod to reassure her. He was ready to play his part. Inside the Red Keep, Margaery oversaw the greeting ceremony in the throne room, feigning delight at the return of Dornish representatives. She introduced them briefly to King Tommen, who managed a shy smile and a polite welcome. Queen Cersei watched from the sidelines, expression tight-lipped, though she made a show of graciousness befitting her station. Tywin Lannister was not present, claiming pressing state business. Or perhaps he simply did not care to greet the same people whose prince had just died trying to condemn his family. Either way, the official welcome was a stiff affair with little warmth. Afterward, Margaery excused herself and Tyene to the garden veranda, where soft breezes made the heat more tolerable. Carafes of chilled wine stood on a table near a small fountain. They made small talk about the weather, about the differences between the gardens of Highgarden and those of Sunspear. Tyene's smiles were reserved, yet she did not shy away from Margaery's gentle questions about her journey. When they were finally out of immediate earshot of the king's court, Margaery took a calculated risk. She turned to Tyene, her voice hushed. "I want to offer my condolences for Prince Oberyn's death. He was a man of remarkable passion and skill. His loss, it pains us all." Tyene's face hardened, though her smile remained. "You are kind, your grace, to speak so fondly of a man who opposed the crown in battle. My father was proud, reckless at times, but he fought for what he believed in." Margaery inclined her head. "And if I may be frank, many of us believe that those responsible have not been held accountable. I know how easy it is for the official story to become the only story told." Tyene's gaze flicked around to check for onlookers, then returned to Margaery's. "I appreciate your concern," she said evenly. "You must know how passionately we Dornish love our own. My father was dear to Prince Doran, to all of us. The wounds are still fresh." Margaery placed a delicate hand on Tyene's arm, an intimate gesture that could be passed off as sympathetic friendship. "If I can help you or your prince to soothe those wounds in any way, you need only say so. The Tyrells have never sought enmity with Dorne. We have far more in common than some might guess." A flicker of understanding passed across Tyene's face. She smiled wider, though there was a quicksilver shift in her eyes. "It warms my heart to hear that. Dorne stands alone too often. We have a proud history of independence. But alliances can heal old hurts and create new strengths. My sisters and I, we believe in forging new paths." Margaery nodded slowly, letting a small, knowing smile curl her lips. "Forging new paths indeed. If you would ever care to share a quiet moment in your solar or mine, just the two of us, I would be delighted to discuss. Oh, I don't know, the future." Tyene studied her for a heartbeat, weighing the meaning behind her words. At last, she curtsied gracefully. "Your Grace, it would be an honor. Let us find some time away from the bustle of court life. Perhaps we can discuss what might have been in better times, and what might yet be in times to come." They parted with perfectly polite farewells. Margaery's heart fluttered with the thrill of having made a covert connection. It was dangerous, yes, but the seeds of an alliance often germinated in the shadows. Over the next week, Margaery orchestrated a series of subtle exchanges with Tyene. They would pass each other in the halls, each accompanied by a retinue of ladies, and share an innocuous greeting that carried layered meaning behind their smiles. During feasts, Margaery might move seats so as to be in earshot of Tyene, or gesture for her to approach and discuss trifles like Dornish fashions or the best wine from the arbor. Always, there was a sense that both women were dancing around the real matter on their minds, though no one around them seemed to suspect. It was on a hot afternoon, beneath the shade of a blossoming fruit tree in the palace gardens, that they finally spoke in more open terms. Margaery had dismissed her ladies to gather baskets of fresh blooms, leaving just 1 or 2 watchers near the garden entrance. Tyene arrived soon after, also with a token companion who lingered at a discreet distance. They sipped chilled water from an ornate pitcher, pretending to admire the flowers. "Tell me, Lady Tyene," said Margaery quietly, "how fares Prince Doran? Is his health what it should be, after so many years of gout?" Tyene nodded, pouring water into her cup. "He endures as he always has, slowly, carefully, with an eye to caution. I think he suspects that caution might not be enough in the days to come." Margaery plucked a pink rose from the bush beside her. "Sometimes caution can be a shield. Sometimes it can become a cage. One must know the difference, lest it trap you." Tyene's soft laugh was tinged with a bitterness that belied her sweet face. "The Martells know much of cages. Our alliance to the Iron Throne has always felt forced by necessity, not by love." Margaery inhaled the fragrant scent of the rose. "Love can blossom from necessity, they say, but only if trust also exists. I fear that trust has been broken." Tyene's gaze slid to the palace in the distance, where the red stone glowed under the sun. "Many in Dorne feel that way. We wonder how we can ever trust the Lannisters again. My father's death was only the latest thorn. The memory of Elia Martell's fate remains. The mountain who killed her is the same who killed my father." She paused. "And yet, we must be careful not to repeat the same mistakes that led us here. Prince Doran believes in measured steps. He will not fling Dorne into open rebellion unless he sees no other choice." Margaery turned to face Tyene fully, her voice lilting with a soft earnestness. "Then perhaps there is a middle path. A path where Dorne finds strength in an alliance with House Tyrell. We, too, have grievances, though we have hidden them well. The Lannisters rule through fear and coin, but we have the fertile fields of the Reach. We feed the realm. Our wealth is not inconsiderable. If House Tyrell and House Martell were to stand together, who could stand against us?" A tension thrummed in the air. Tyene's eyes flashed, and she set her cup aside. "You speak boldly, my queen, and yet you wear the crown of a Lannister king." "The boy king," Margaery corrected gently. "He is sweet, but young. The power behind the throne is Tywin, or perhaps Cersei. And I know how precarious my position is within that family. Believe me, if it would secure their future, they might cast the Tyrells aside tomorrow." Tyene studied her carefully, as though weighing her words for sincerity. "And so you would forge a separate destiny?" "I wish to see the realm united under a power less cruel. I wish to preserve my family's future, as I'm sure you do." Margaery offered a tiny smile. "If we can find a path that benefits both Dorne and the Reach, then the Lannisters will be forced to reckon with us. We can demand justice for Oberyn Martell. We can insist on better terms for all involved. The alternative is more bloodshed under Lannister supremacy." Tyene was silent for a long moment. Eventually, she nodded. "I cannot speak for Prince Doran in full, but I can carry your words to him, in letters written with the care of a scribe who believes in secrecy. If he sees the advantage, he may be willing to consider a pact. But such a thing would be unprecedented. We've historically not been allies." Margaery handed her the pink rose. Tyene accepted it. "Allies can bloom in the unlikeliest places, if nurtured properly," Margaery said. "Tell him, House Tyrell is open to discreet correspondence, and let him know we understand Dorne's fury. We, too, have cause to be wary of the crown." Tyene lowered her head in a gesture of understanding. "I will do so, but do not expect an immediate answer. My uncle is patient, calculating. He will measure every angle before agreeing to anything." "As will I," Margaery replied with a soft curve of her lips. "I look forward to hearing from you in the meantime. In public, we remain simply acquaintances. In private, we might cultivate something much stronger." Tyene thanked her and withdrew, leaving Margaery alone with the gentle swirl of bees around the flowers. The young queen consort exhaled slowly, her heart pounding with adrenaline. There was no going back now. She had set into motion an audacious intrigue that could reshape the alliances of Westeros. If Prince Doran responded favorably, then House Tyrell would have a powerful partner in Dorne. If he did not, or if word of her betrayal leaked to the Lannisters, it could mean the end of her entire family. Still, the alternative, remaining passive under Lannister dominance, seemed far worse. She thought of Tommen, sweet Tommen, who deserved a gentler realm than the one his grandfather and mother would craft. And she thought of Oberyn Martell, who had died in the sand of that arena, screaming his demand for vengeance against the mountain. Life in King's Landing had taught her that illusions of peace were just that, illusions. True security required power, alliances, and cunning. Margaery Tyrell had all three in abundance, if she dared to use them. The first letters arrived from Sunspear in carefully wrapped parcels that passed unnoticed among the usual shipments of trade goods from the Reach. A local merchant, loyal to House Tyrell, would receive a crate of the finest Dornish lemons, and hidden among them would be a sealed message. These letters never bore Doran Martell's official seal, only a subtle mark that Tyene had instructed Margaery to look for. A small sun and spear design etched in wax near the corner of the parchment. Doran's words were measured, cautious. He acknowledged the possibility of a pact, stressed the necessity of secrecy, and inquired after House Tyrell's true intentions. He was wary of an elaborate Lannister trap. Margaery replied with equal discretion, using the same merchant route. She described her concerns about Tywin Lannister's iron grip on the kingdom, and she offered small proofs of her sincerity, such as inside knowledge about certain shipping lanes or upcoming crown decrees that might affect Dornish trade. In each letter, she pressed the idea that House Tyrell did not benefit from a realm ruled solely by Lannister might, and that an alliance with Dorne could shift the balance of power. Weeks turned into months, and the heat of King's Landing was a swirl of petty intrigues. Queen Cersei found new ways to undermine Margaery at court, from subtle barbs to attempts to smear her as an opportunistic queen. Tommen, naive and eager to please, was caught between them. Margaery responded with kindness, building Tommen's trust while never losing her outward composure. She also continued to host lavish feasts and charitable works in the city, keeping the common folk's affection. The people of King's Landing admired her generosity compared to Cersei's aloofness. Meanwhile, Loras Tyrell, still dedicated to his Kingsguard duties, confided in Margaery that the city was rife with rumors about Dorne's next move. Men whisper that the Martells have refused to sign any final treaty with the crown, he said one evening in Margaery's chambers. They won't accept the Lannisters' terms without reparations for Oberyn. Tywin is furious, but the Martells aren't budging. I wonder if the Lannisters will try to strong-arm them. Margaery's spine stiffened. If they do, it may be the spark that sets this city ablaze. Dorne will never forget Oberyn, not after how he died. Loras paced, wearing a path into the thick carpet. I'm nervous, Margaery. If your alliance with the Martells becomes known. She touched his arm to calm him. It won't, not unless we choose to reveal it. Doran knows the risk as well as we do. But be prepared, Loras. If matters come to a head, we'll need your skill with a blade. We Tyrells must be ready to stand on the side that best secures our future. He nodded, grim and determined. Just be sure you know when to reveal your plans. If you wait too long, we could be taken by surprise. If you move too soon, we might be crushed by the Lannisters before Dorne can come to our aid. Margaery allowed a small, sad smile. Such is the game we play. In the secrecy of night, a final letter arrived that set matters in motion. It was shorter than usual, delivered by one of Tyene Sand's trusted allies. Margaery broke the seal in her solar, anxious candlelight flickering across her face as she read. I have measured all that you have said, and your words bear the weight of sincerity. The Lannisters have refused to grant us justice, nor have they offered recompense for the death of my brother, Prince Oberyn, or the crimes committed against Elia Martell. My patience grows thin. If an opportunity arises to humble those who have wronged my family and restore the balance of power, I will not stand idle. We are prepared to strike when the moment is right, but secrecy remains paramount. A time may soon come when you and I must stand openly against King's Landing. The consequences will be dire if we fail. But if we succeed, a new dawn will rise over Westeros. Send a raven if you require direct assistance, or if the hour to act has arrived. I entrust this knowledge to you and your house. We await your signal. Signed in the sight of the Seven, Doran of House Martell, Prince of Dorne. Margaery inhaled sharply. The letter was neither flamboyant nor grand. It was a simple statement of intent. Dorne was ready to move quietly or brazenly, depending on the Tyrell's signal. She felt a surge of excitement tempered by the cold hand of fear. This was real. This was treason if discovered. But it was also a moment of truth. The Tyrells could either cast their lot with the Lannisters forever or seize their own destiny. She sat for a long while, reading the letter by the glow of the single candle, letting the words settle into her mind. Memories of Sansa Stark's warnings about King's Landing flitted through her thoughts. Cersei's eyes tracking her every move, Tywin's stern judgments, the Crown's underlying hostility toward anyone who wasn't a Lannister or their direct vassal. It all welled up inside her. Margaery Tyrell had always dreamt of being a beloved queen, but a queen loved by the people didn't necessarily align with a Lannister on court. Finally, she rose and left the Solar, carrying the letter to her grandmother's chamber. Olenna was already in her nightclothes, hair unbound. Yet when Margaery entered unannounced, the old woman's eyes flashed with concern and curiosity. "We have our answer," Margaery said quietly, handing her the parchment. Olenna put on a pair of reading glasses and scanned it. After a moment, she looked up. "So, the die is cast. Prince Doran is done playing nice." Margaery nodded, her throat tight. "He waits for our signal. When do we give it?" Olenna's lips pressed together. "We must choose the timing carefully. The Lannisters will not suspect we would act before Tommen is older or more entrenched. But if we wait too long, Tywin may secure alliances that keep us pinned. At the same time, we must not rush into conflict without ensuring our bannermen are aligned. A war between the Reach and the Westerlands would tear the realm apart, and Dorne would add fuel to the fire." Margaery took a step closer. "But if we coordinate with Dorne, we might sweep the Lannisters aside before they can mount a real defense. They have gold, but their armies have been bloodied by previous wars. Father has the strength of the Reach at his command, and the Martells are formidable. We could do this swiftly. Cut the head off the lion." Olenna placed the letter down on the small table beside her bed. "You've grown into a fine schemer, my dear, but do not forget, Tywin Lannister is no fool. He knows we are the only other major power left that can threaten him. He will be wary, and that venomous daughter of his, Cersei, she will lash out the moment she senses betrayal. It could mean chaos in King's Landing, possibly the death of innocent people." Margaery swallowed. "Would you have me do nothing, then?" Olenna let out a small sigh. "Heavens, no. I'm just an old woman who sees the storm clouds. If you and I decide to move, we must be prepared for the cost. Are you prepared, child?" She hesitated, then nodded firmly. "I am. The realm will never see peace under Lannister rule. The seeds of vengeance are too deeply sown. This must be done for the sake of the future, for the sake of Highgarden, for the sake of Tommen, for the sake of your own security," Olenna finished with a knowing smile. "Then let us take the next steps. I will pen a few letters to the major Reach houses, quietly gauging their readiness. You will do your part here in King's Landing, ensuring we maintain the facade of loyalty. And when the time is ripe, we will send word to Prince Doran that House Tyrell is ready to move." Margaery exhaled in relief, her body trembling with the enormity of what lay ahead. She leaned down and kissed her grandmother's cheek. "Thank you, grandmother." Olenna patted her hand. "We Tyrells must look after our own. We have come too far to let the Lannisters overshadow us forever." In the moonlit halls of the Red Keep, Margaery walked with purpose. She made sure to smile at the guards, her presence giving no hint of the treasonous alliance she was building. Internally, her mind churned with plans. How to ensure Tommen was kept safe once the coup began. how to manage the chaos of a potential Dornish incursion on King's Landing, how to confront Cersei. The city was a tinderbox. One spark of conflict between the Lannisters and Martells, if timed with a Tyrell betrayal, would create an explosion that might level the balance of power overnight. Still, the nights and days passed with an eerie calm, like the hush before a great tempest. Margaery continued her queenly duties, distributing bread to the poor, holding audiences with small folk, entertaining foreign visitors. She was the picture of generosity. This served a dual purpose. It endeared her further to the populace and distracted from her true machinations. Rumors of dissent might swirl in the underbelly of the city, but few would suspect the beloved Queen Margaery of treacherous ambitions. At long last, the catalyst arrived. Tywin Lannister announced that he was planning to force new trade sanctions against Dorne in retaliation for their lack of cooperation in finalizing a treaty. "They must be reminded," Tywin declared at the small council table, "that the Crown's patience is not infinite. If they will not sign a formal treaty, we will cut off the supply of goods that flow north from Dorne. We shall demonstrate the cost of defiance." Margaery, present at the small council in her capacity as queen consort, stiffened at the pronouncement. She knew that such sanctions would not just harm Dorne but also incite fury. Doran Martell would likely interpret it as a challenge, possibly an act of war. This might prompt Dorne to retaliate or blockade trade from their end. In a matter of weeks, the situation could escalate beyond repair. She exchanged a furtive glance with her grandmother, who was quietly tapping a finger on the council table. Olenna's face was unreadable, but that small motion told Margaery everything. The moment was nearly upon them. Cersei, seated on the other side of the table with a smug air, looked pleased. Margaery found herself wondering if Cersei realized she was about to unleash the very forces that could destroy her family. Probably not. Cersei's pride rarely let her see beyond the immediate gratification of lashing out. Margaery lowered her gaze demurely, hiding her distaste. The small council meeting ended with a consensus. Tywin and his supporters agreed to the sanctions. Margaery's voice was not solicited, nor was she in a position to protest openly. Afterward, she left with Olenna, mindful of the red-cloaked guards who might overhear any ill-chosen words. In a narrow corridor, Olenna leaned toward her granddaughter. "It's time," she murmured. "If we wait, Tywin will provoke Dorne into open war. If we act first, we can coordinate with Prince Doran and turn the tables on the Lannisters." Margaery breathed a shaky sigh. "I will contact Tyene. Let Prince Doran know that we are ready. Father must rally our bannermen in the Reach. We'll claim that we act in support of the Crown's need for more troops, until the last moment." Olenna's mouth quirked in a wry smile. "Yes, we shall gather our forces under the pretense of readiness for war, and then we'll strike. The only question is how best to handle the capital itself. Taking King's Landing peacefully might be impossible if the Goldcloaks remain loyal to the Lannisters." Margaery looked away, uncertain. "I must ensure Tommen is not harmed. I care for him, grandmother. Perhaps we can keep him as a ward of House Tyrell, or at least keep him away from the fighting." Her grandmother's expression softened fractionally. "We can try, but in war no outcome is guaranteed. We'll do our best to protect the boy king." Margaery nodded. "Then let us not delay." The cloak of night once again covered the city when Margaery penned her final letter to Prince Doran. She used a simple code they had devised, referencing the blooming of the desert rose and the harvest season in Highgarden. Each phrase signaled the Tyrells' readiness to enact their plan. She wrote succinctly, "The harvest season is upon us. The desert rose has reached its most glorious bloom. In the coming weeks, the fields of the Reach shall prepare for the final reaping of the year. We pray that our friends in the southern sands will find their sun at its brightest. May the Seven grant us guidance when the orchard yields its fruit." She folded the letter, pressed her seal upon it, a rose etched in golden wax, and entrusted it to the merchant who had carried all her other correspondence. If all went according to plan, the message would arrive in Sunspear within days. From there, Doran would take the final steps to mobilize Dornish forces. Whether they marched north through the Prince's Pass or struck at King's Landing from the sea, Margaery did not know for sure. It was Doran's choice now how to best deploy his armies. Meanwhile, House Tyrell prepared under the leadership of Mace Tyrell. Mace was easily convinced that the crown needed reinforcements to quell any potential Dornish rebellion. He never guessed his own preparations would be turned against the Lannisters. The Tyrell bannermen were called to muster, a show of strength that Tywin Lannister likely welcomed, believing it signaled Tyrell loyalty. Margaery played her part flawlessly. She made gentle references to her father's mobilization, always painting it as support for the crown's upcoming sanctions against Dorne. Cersei and Tywin took the bait. They were suspicious of Dorne, not the Reach, and believed the Tyrells too dependent on Lannister favor to betray them. Summer winds gave way to the hint of autumn. On a hazy morning, Margaery awakened with a knot in her stomach. She felt the tension in the castle's corridors, an electric sense that something massive was about to happen. Servants hustled about with anxious faces. Quiet rumors whispered that the Dornish banner lords were marching. Some said the Fowler troops had moved toward the Prince's Pass, and House Ironwood was mustering near the Boneway. But official news was scarce, and Tywin had not yet put the city on high alert. He simply ordered more Lannister men to guard the gates. Margaery dressed in a gown of deep burgundy, more subdued than her usual attire. She pinned a brooch shaped like a rose and sun, a subtle nod to the alliance no one else suspected. The day's business took her to the Great September of Baelor, where she oversaw a donation of food to the poor. Then she returned to the Red Keep, her heart pounding as she anticipated the first open blow. Came at midday. Bells rang atop the castle ramparts, signaling the approach of a large host from the south. From a high balcony, Margaery watched as the gold cloaks on the walls peered into the distance. She saw the glint of armor, the flash of banners. At first, many assumed these were Tyrell reinforcements. Then the rumors swept through the throng. The banners were not the golden rose of Tyrell or the golden lion of Lannister. They were the sun and spear of House Martell. King's Landing erupted in confusion. Had Dorne come to pledge fealty or to attack? People bared Oberyn Martell's savage end. They remembered the centuries-old feud between the Martells and the Iron Throne. Tension rippled through the crowded streets. Tywin Lannister, flanked by Lannister soldiers, hurried to the gatehouse to confront the Dornish host. Cersei seethed with indignation. Where were the Tyrell forces to defend them if the Dornish came for war? Margaery slipped away from the balcony, her blood singing with adrenaline. Now was the moment of truth. If Prince Doran had arrived at King's Landing in force, it was not to parley. He was making a statement, and the Tyrell banner lords who'd been mustering near the city would soon make theirs. She found Loras in the courtyard, hurriedly buckling his sword belt. "Sister, the city is in an uproar," Loras said breathlessly. "The Dornish are at the gates. Tywin's men are forming ranks, but Father's forces are also encamped nearby. If Father turns on the Lannisters now," she clasped his shoulders, "then King's Landing is ours, brother. Dorne and the Reach together can crush the Lannisters' hold. Listen, I must go to Tommen. He must not be harmed. Ensure that we control the Goldcloaks if possible. Remind them who feeds the realm. Our house can promise them better pay and stability once the Lannisters are subdued." He hesitated only a second before nodding. "Very well. Be careful." Margaery hurried through the corridors, passing terrified courtiers and scrambling servants. The Red Keep was a maze of confusion. She found Tommen in his private chambers, surrounded by Kingsguard, including Ser Boros Blunt and Ser Meryn Trant. The boy king looked up with wide, frightened eyes as Margaery entered. "Margaery!" he exclaimed, relief flooding his voice. "They say the Martells are here. Are we in danger?" She approached him calmly, kneeling so that her gaze was level with his. "The Dornish have come to address injustices done to them, Your Grace. But do not be afraid. I will keep you safe." Cersei swept in behind her like a storm cloud, her eyes flashing. "So this is where you've slithered off to, girl," she spat. I might have known you'd be whispering treason to my son." Margaery rose, spine stiff with resolve. "I'm here to protect him, your grace, as I've always done." Her heart hammered. Cersei's presence now posed a volatile threat. The entire plan hung on a knife's edge. If Cersei realized the Tyrell betrayal was imminent, she might try to harm Margaery or sequester Tommen to keep him under her control. Cersei's lips curled. "If the Martells think they can force entry into my city without consequence, they'll soon learn otherwise. Tywin is already leading the lion's share of our forces. He'll slaughter the Dornish like he did at the Trident." Margaery met the Queen Mother's gaze, trying to hide the fury she felt. "Perhaps we should avoid violence. The city has suffered enough." Cersei scoffed. "You truly are a simpleton if you believe in peace with these snake lovers. Step away from my son, or I'll have the Kingsguard remove you." Margaery looked to Tommen. "My king, you know me. I only want what's best." But Tommen was too frightened to speak. Cersei seized his arm, guiding him behind her. The Kingsguard closed ranks. Margaery saw Ser Meryn's hand drift toward his sword. She began to fear that the confrontation might turn violent right then and there. She weighed her options. Could she call for Loras? Could she simply leave to avoid provoking a confrontation? A thunderous boom echoed across the city, followed by screams and the clash of steel. A faint shout carried through the windows. "Dorne! Dorne!" Another, "Reach men to arms!" Margaery's heart clenched. It had begun. Cersei's eyes were wild. She flung open the chamber doors and barked orders to the Kingsguard. "Protect the king at all costs. Take him to Maegor's Holdfast." She whirled on Margaery. "Stay out of my way, you little schemer, or you'll find your father hanging from the city walls by nightfall." Margaery's mind raced. She wanted to protect Tommen, to keep him out of the carnage, but she knew she couldn't wrest him away from Cersei under these conditions. She had to trust that her family would take King's Landing quickly, or at least force the Lannisters to surrender. If she tried to stand in Cersei's way now, she'd likely end up dead on a Kingsguard blade. She clenched her fists as Cersei dragged Tommen from the room. He cast a helpless glance at Margaery, tears brimming in his eyes. Then he was gone, hustled away by the white cloaks. Margaery pressed her hands to her cheeks, breathing rapidly. This was not how she'd wanted the takeover to go. Perhaps she had been naive to think they could do this with minimal bloodshed. With a quiet oath, she turned on her heel and ran after them, heading deeper into the Red Keep. Maegor's Holdfast, she might not be able to breach it, but at least she could track how the siege progressed. Along the way, she passed windows that offered views of the city below. Columns of Tyrell spears had emerged from their encampments, banners streaming in the wind. Dornish cavalry pressed at the gates. Lannister forces, caught between them, were already falling back. Flames licked at a section of the city near the Lion Gate, and the smell of smoke wafted in. From the ramparts, she glimpsed a mass of gold cloaks standing uncertainly, likely unsure whether to side with the Lannisters or to remain neutral. The Tyrell gold would be more appealing than the fear of Cersei, Margaery hoped. If the City Watch turned coat, the Lannisters would lose their hold on King's Landing in a matter of hours. She darted down another corridor and nearly collided with Ser Loras, who had his sword drawn and a bloody scratch on his cheek. "Sister," he hissed. "It's madness out there. The Dornish are fighting Lannisters at the city gates. Father's forces attacked the Lannisters from behind. Grandmother is waiting in the throne room. We're trying to get the gold cloaks to stand aside and let us take control." Margaery caught her breath. Where is Cersei taking Tommen? Loras's face was grim. She's barricading herself in Maegor's Holdfast with him. If she can hold out, the Lannisters might negotiate a truce. We can't let them. Father is demanding Tywin's surrender. But that old lion is still out there with his soldiers, trying to rally men near the Iron Gate. She gripped Loras's sleeve. "We have to end this quickly, before too many innocents die. The city will starve if we're not careful. The Tyrells and Martells came here to break the Lannisters, not to butcher half of King's Landing." He gave a curt nod, guiding her away. "Come. The throne room is secure for now. Martell soldiers have joined forces with ours there. We can coordinate. They navigated the labyrinthine passages until they reached the cavernous throne room, where the Iron Throne loomed, cold and menacing. The space was alive with motion. Tyrell men-at-arms formed a shield wall near the dais, and a group of Dornish spearmen stood guard at the entrance, their sun and spear banners draped from the columns. Oberyn's daughters, at least 2 of them, were present, scanning the room with fierce eyes. And at the center of it all, directing the chaos, was Olenna Tyrell in her stately robes, her face set in a mask of determination. As soon as Olenna saw Margaery, she nodded her over. "So far, so good," she murmured. "We've seized most of the Red Keep. I expect Tywin will be forced to retreat or surrender once he sees we control the heart of King's Landing. The gold cloaks have mostly stepped aside, except for a few pockets of resistance. We must ensure the city doesn't erupt into riots." Margaery swallowed hard. "And Cersei?" Tommen, Olenna's mouth tightened. "They're holed up in Maegor's Holdfast. We can lay siege if we must, or perhaps starve them out. But that would be messy. I'd rather force a surrender. Tywin's defeat outside the walls may settle the matter." Margaery shuddered, imagining the horrors that might unfold if Cersei resisted until the bitter end. The Queen Mother was capable of anything. But now, the synergy of Tyrell and Martell forces in the throne room made it clear that the Lannisters had lost their iron grip. A hush descended as a group of Dornish riders entered, one of them bearing the sigil of House Martell. The man removed his helm, Ser Demon Sand, a known knight in Dornish retinue. He bowed to Olenna and then spoke with quiet urgency. "Prince Doran's orders, my lady. Push for Tywin Lannister's immediate surrender. If he resists, we shall see that he never leaves the city alive." Olenna straightened, one hand resting on the arm of the Iron Throne. "Then we shall do precisely that. Take your men and assist my son in capturing Tywin. We'll offer him one chance to kneel. If he refuses, let him face the consequences of his pride." Ser Demon bowed again and departed. The Dornish spearmen followed in a disciplined column. Margaery watched them go, adrenaline coursing through her. Within hours, perhaps even minutes, Tywin Lannister's fate would be decided. She could hardly believe how quickly the tide had turned. The city was theirs if they could force Cersei's hand. A faint clamor from the courtyard outside the throne room drew Margaery's attention. She moved to a tall window to see the Red Keep's yard swarming with Tyrell soldiers. Distant horns sounded from beyond the walls. Shadows danced on the parapets as the sun descended in the sky, painting the capital in orange hues. War had come to King's Landing again, but this time, the lion was cornered by the rose and the sun. She glanced back at the Iron Throne, feeling a tumult of emotions. In forging this alliance, she had set into motion the downfall of House Lannister, an outcome that might save thousands of lives in the long run or plunge them all into more bloodshed. She prayed it would be the former. The city would need rebuilding, the realm would need healing. But perhaps there could be a chance for real peace once the lion was declawed. "Sister," Loras murmured, stepping up beside her, "we must see to Tommen. The men have begun to encircle Maegor's Holdfast." She nodded, steeling herself. She had to face Cersei eventually. This was the price of seizing power. Under the watchful eyes of armed Tyrell and Martell soldiers, Margaery made her way to Maegor's Holdfast, accompanied by Olenna and several high-ranking Tyrell knights. The fortress within a fortress was ringed by a moat. Cersei's loyal guards stood at the far side, crossbows at the ready. Shouts volleyed back and forth, demanding parley or threatening attack. Margaery raised her voice, projecting calm authority. "We have no wish to harm the king. We desire only a peaceful resolution. Let us speak with the Queen Mother." First, there was no response. Then, after several tense moments, a slender bridge was lowered partway. 2 Kingsguard knights emerged, meeting Margaery's party on the midpoint. Ser Boros Blunt's sweat-soaked face glistened as he surveyed the row of archers behind Margaery. "Cersei will not yield," he said in a trembling voice. "She says she'd rather die than surrender to Dornish or Tyrell traitors." Margaery stayed composed. We are not traitors. We stand for a new order in King's Landing, one that will protect the king and the people. You have seen the city's gates. You have seen who holds the Red Keep. There is no escape. If she forces a fight, it will lead only to bloodshed and could endanger the king. Ser Boros swallowed. The second Kingsguard, Ser Meryn Trant, looked equally uneasy. She will not listen, Ser Meryn muttered. She threatened to kill us if we suggested surrender again. Margaery felt Olenna's presence at her side. The older woman spoke in a firm tone. If she truly cares for her son, she will see reason. Otherwise, we shall be forced to break down the holdfast doors. The blood that follows will be on her hands. They retreated to wait for an answer, leaving Ser Boros and Ser Meryn to carry the message inside. The tension was suffocating. Margaery's heart hammered in her chest. She dreaded the idea of forcibly storming the holdfast. Even if it succeeded, Tommen might be hurt or used as a hostage by Cersei in a final act of desperation. Meanwhile, the city beyond the Red Keep roiled with confusion, but the presence of Tyrell and Dornish forces had largely subdued pockets of Lannister resistance. Barricades were thrown up in some streets, but word of Tywin's encirclement and likely capture had spread, fueling a sense of inevitability. The lion's time was done. Would Cersei see that? The answer came in the form of Ser Boros reemerging, alone. He stood on the far side of the moat, voice shaking. The Queen Mother requests a parley. Unarmed. Margaery exhaled, relief and anxiety warring in her. She turned to Olenna and Loras, who both wore guarded expressions. I have to go, she said quietly. She won't speak to anyone else, and I must ensure Tommen's safety. Olenna pursed her lips. Take 2 men with you, men you trust, but keep them at a distance, if that's what it takes. Margaery nodded and selected 2 Tyrell knights she knew to be loyal. Ser Jon Fossaway and Ser Devon Beesbury followed at her back, stopping at a discreet distance from the bridge. Margaery proceeded alone, crossing the narrow walkway over the moat. Her pulse thudded in her ears. Inside Maegor's holdfast courtyard, a ring of Lannister guards stood watch. Far fewer than she might have expected. Many must have fled or surrendered. Cersei waited at the foot of a stone staircase, still wearing her regal gown. Her hair was disheveled, her eyes rimmed red, but her posture was one of defiance. Tommen was behind her, pale-faced. The Kingsguard who remained loyal to her hovered nearby. Margaery stepped forward, careful to keep her hands visible. Your Grace, I've come as you requested. Cersei's lip curled. Spare me the courtesies. I know you've plotted this from the start. You Tyrell whores have always wanted the throne for yourselves. Margaery kept her voice calm. This was never about wanting the throne. It is about freeing the realm from Lannister tyranny. House Tyrell grew weary of tyranny. Cersei barked a laugh, eyes blazing. You speak of tyranny while you scheme with the Dornish to tear the city apart? You left us no choice, Margaery said, her tone unexpectedly firm. Prince Oberyn was murdered under your family's protection, and no justice was served. You threatened Dorne, threatened all who opposed you, and refused to share power or trust. The realm would drown in blood if we continued to let the Lannisters rule unchecked. Cersei scowled, her knuckles white around Tommen's sleeve. You come here with talk of justice. The only justice you'll find is a traitor's death. Margaery's gaze flicked to Tommen, who looked like he might faint. She softened her voice. Your Grace, I beg you, do not force a violent end. Tommen is innocent. Let him be king in peace. Abandon this hopeless fight. The Queen Mother's laugh was hollow. You want to keep him as your puppet. Don't deny it. You'll feed him sweet lies until he does your bidding. She clutched Tommen's shoulder tighter. He winced. I'd sooner kill him myself than let him be your plaything. The threat was real. Margaery froze, horror gripping her. She took a slow step forward, hands raised in a placating gesture. No, Cersei. Tommen's safety is paramount. I swear on the Seven I only want him to be well. He is the rightful king, and we will not harm him. Tommen's eyes darted between them, tears streaking his cheeks. Mother, please. Cersei stared at Margaery for a chilling moment. Then she flung Tommen toward the Kingsguard, who caught him roughly. She advanced on Margaery, voice cold as death. "Do you think I don't know your game, girl? You'll have him crowned at your side, but you'll be the one ruling." Margaery stood her ground, every muscle tense. "Better that than you and Tywin ruling through fear." With a snarl, Cersei reached to her belt and drew a small dagger. "You win nothing," she shrieked. She lunged, blade flashing. Margaery reacted instinctively, stumbling backward. She raised an arm to block, and the dagger sliced through her sleeve, drawing a line of blood across her forearm. Crying out, she grappled with Cersei. For a moment, they were locked together, eyes blazing in mutual hatred. Then a sudden blow to Margaery's side sent her reeling. She fell to one knee, breath knocked from her lungs. Before Cersei could strike again, hands seized her from behind. Ser Boros and Ser Meryn had intervened, prying the dagger from her hand. She screeched and kicked, furious tears streaming down her face. The Kingsguard looked torn, but even they could see the madness in Cersei's eyes. Tommen sobbed as Ser Meryn and Ser Boros wrestled the Queen Mother's arms behind her back. Margaery clutched her bleeding arm. She signaled her 2 Tyrell knights, who rushed forward with swords half-drawn. She forced out words despite the pain. "Don't hurt her. Restrain her only," Cersei thrashed. "Get your hands off me, you traitors. He's my son, and I'll kill every last." Her words devolved into screams. One of the Kingsguard helped Margaery to her feet. Her breath came in ragged gasps. She looked at Tommen with genuine concern. "It's all right," she managed. "She won't be harmed, but she cannot be allowed to do this." Tommen nodded tremulously, tears shining. He stared at his mother, who continued to rage, then looked back at Margaery. In that moment, Margaery saw that the boy's innocence had been shattered. She gently placed a hand on his shoulder, ignoring the burn of pain in her wounded arm. "You're safe now," she whispered. "You are still king, but your mother must be kept under guard until she recovers her senses." He swallowed hard, then lowered his head. I understand." With Cersei rendered helpless, Margaery's knights swiftly secured Maegor's holdfast. The remaining Lannister guards, seeing no hope, laid down their arms. Within the hour, Margaery stood in the courtyard, blood seeping through the torn fabric of her sleeve as she watched Tyrell soldiers carefully escort the Queen Mother away to a guarded tower cell. Tommen was placed under watch as well, but gently, with sincere efforts to calm and comfort him. He was, after all, still king, and the realm needed a king. As dusk fell, the bells of the city rang anew. Word arrived from the gatehouses. Tywin Lannister had been cornered. The once invincible hand of the king was forced to surrender, his legendary composure shattered by the swiftness of his defeat. Few men would mourn him, Margaery suspected. She stood with Olenna on a rampart overlooking King's Landing. Fires still flickered in some streets, but the chaos had largely died. Dornish and Tyrell banners fluttered from the ramparts. The Lions' flags were being torn down. The people in the streets looked frightened, unsure of what would come next. But so far, mass violence had been avoided. "There it is, child," Olenna said quietly. "We've toppled the Lannisters. A new day dawns." Margaery's arm throbbed, and exhaustion weighed on her. "Yes," she replied softly. "Now we must rebuild. Keep the king safe, guide him. Keep the Martells satisfied that justice is served." She let her head bow. "I only pray we can do better than the Lannisters did." Her grandmother placed a hand on her shoulder. "We must, or else we're no better than they were." Below them, a knot of soldiers cheered as a group of Dornish cavalry rode in, brandishing their spears in victory. Margaery watched, feeling a swirl of conflicting emotions. Triumph, relief, fear, hope. She thought of Oberyn Martell's fierce grin, thought of how proud he would be that his beloved Dorne had risen to avenge him. She thought of the Tyrell rose, so often overshadowed by the lion's roar, now in full bloom. She thought of Tommen, a child thrust onto the throne in a realm grown accustomed to war. There would be a reckoning for the atrocities committed in the Lannisters' name. Prince Doran would likely demand trials, tributes, maybe even further retribution. But for now, House Tyrell and House Martell stood as the new powers of King's Landing. A fragile alliance, born of necessity and sealed by common enmity, but perhaps one that could hold the realm together in the aftermath of the Lion's downfall. She closed her eyes, inhaling the smoke-tinged air, imagining a future where the rose and the sun illuminated Westeros with something gentler than the lion's shadow. The path ahead was uncertain, littered with challenges, but she would face it with the same resolve that had led her here. Margaery Tyrell, queen consort to King Tommen Baratheon, had orchestrated a revolution. Now came the work of ruling alongside her unlikely allies and ensuring that the dream of a kinder, more just kingdom did not wither under the scorching rays of vengeance. Only time would tell if this new arrangement could truly deliver on its promises, or if the cycle of bloodshed would simply continue under different banners. But for that single moment, as dusk settled and the city quieted, Margaery allowed herself a small, hopeful smile. They had done what had once seemed impossible. They had broken the Lannisters' stranglehold, and in that victory, perhaps, lay the seeds of a new order that would finally let peace take root in Westeros. Margaery stood on the ramparts of the Red Keep well into the evening, watching the fires across King's Landing flicker beneath a blood-red sky. The clang of steel and the scattered cries of frightened townsfolk had given way to the groans of the wounded and the simmering hush of an occupied city. In every street, soldiers of the Reach and Dorne maintained a tenuous order. Most shops had closed their shutters, their owners wary of roving patrols and uncertain about the new regime's temperament. Yet the city had not fallen into complete chaos. There was no mass looting or butchery like in so many previous sackings. The Tyrell and Martell commands had moved swiftly to clamp down on lawlessness, keenly aware that they needed the goodwill of the common folk. Olenna Tyrell's orders were precise. Ensure discipline, punish any soldier who tried to take advantage of civilians, distribute bread and water to the poor, and announce that the rightful king, Tommen Baratheon, was safe within the Red Keep. Alongside these directives came a stern warning that any Lannister holdouts who refused to surrender would face harsh penalties. The broad acceptance of this order, especially by the gold cloaks who had decided to stand aside, helped preserve an uneasy stability in the capital. Margaery felt a weariness deep in her bones. She had not slept properly in days, not since the moment Doran Martell's army had begun its march toward King's Landing. Her bandaged arm throbbed, the cut from Cersei's dagger still painful. A maester had cleaned and stitched it, but the wound would remind her for some time of how close she had come to being stabbed through the heart by the Queen Mother. She shuddered to think how quickly everything might have ended. Now, as she stared out over a city that had effectively changed hands in a single day, she realized they had reached a crossroads for all of Westeros. The Lannister reign, propped up by Tywin's cunning and Cersei's ambition, was toppled. Whether it remained so depended on what happened next. She withdrew from the ramparts to attend a gathering in the throne room. The halls of the Red Keep seemed in disarray. Fallen banners, displaced furnishings, candelabras overturned in the rush of soldiers. Yet even in that chaos, the Tyrell guards posted at every corner saluted respectfully, calling her Your Grace with the same courtesy they might have shown her in calmer days. Margaery understood that, for their alliance to endure, she must embody the role of queen consort and more. She, not Cersei, must become the mother figure of the realm, or at least a caretaker to a boy king who had just witnessed his mother's breakdown. When she reached the throne room, she found it guarded by Martell spearmen in polished breastplates, their spears glittering in the torchlight. This was no longer the lonely domain of the Lannisters. The Golden Lion banners were gone. Instead, the chamber bristled with the proud sigil of House Tyrell, the Golden Rose, alongside the blazing sun and spear of House Martell. The ancient iron throne loomed on its dais, presiding over the swirling changes as it had for centuries. An unyielding seat of power, indifferent to the occupant. Inside, most of the highborn leaders involved in the coup were gathered near the dais. Olenna Tyrell stood with her cane in hand, sharp eyes assessing everything. Tyene Sand, her blonde curls pinned back, spoke quietly with a pair of Martell knights. Her sisters, Nymeria and Oberyn, lingered at the edges, casting fierce looks around the hall. At the center of attention was Mace Tyrell, red-faced and grandiose as ever, wearing gilded armor that looked more ceremonial than practical. He seemed excited by his sudden status as conqueror of King's Landing, though he still glanced nervously at the Dornish contingent now sharing the throne room. As Margaery approached, the older lords turned to acknowledge her. She offered them a measured dip of her head, neither too fawning nor too haughty. Behind them, lined up in front of the Iron Throne, stood half a dozen captive Lannister officers. Stripped of their armor, they wore only simple tunics stained with sweat and dirt, their faces hollow with defeat. Among these men was a pale, grim-faced Kevan Lannister, brother to Tywin, whose silence spoke volumes. He had been captured earlier that day when Martell cavalry cut off his escape route, and now he was forced to stand in judgment before an alliance that only yesterday had pretended fealty to his family. "Ah, Margaery," Mace boomed, as though greeting a favored child. "We were about to discuss the fate of these men. They have asked for clemency, in exchange for swearing fealty to King Tommen under our protection." He puffed up his chest. "They understand that their cause is lost, with Lord Tywin soon to be presented to us in chains. But the question remains, how do we handle Lannister loyalists?" Across from Mace, a Dornish knight cleared his throat. "Some might say the punishment for their treachery is death. Many in Dorne cry out for justice, which to them means vengeance." Tyene Sand nodded in agreement, though her eyes were thoughtful rather than bloodthirsty. "They killed my father, Prince Oberyn, and for years they have refused to atone for that crime. My sisters and I have no love for Lannisters. But Prince Doran insists that we avoid a repeat of old horrors, so we weigh what is best for the realm." Olenna tapped her cane on the floor. "The realm is in enough turmoil. A mass execution of Lannister bannermen will only stoke more hatred and inspire them to rally in the Westerlands. If we want lasting stability, we must show some measure of mercy. That is not the same as leniency. They must yield fully, swear loyalty to King Tommen and the New Order, and possibly pay reparations." Kevan Lannister looked at Olenna with flat, tired eyes. "The Lannisters have the gold of Casterly Rock. We can meet the demands for reparations, if that is what you ask." Margaery raised a hand gently to silence them all. She moved toward Kevan with calm grace. "Sir Kevan, do you speak for the loyalists who remain in the city? Will they surrender fully? Will they renounce Tywin's cause?" Kevan exhaled. "I am not a fool, Your Grace. The battle for King's Landing is over. If you will have us bend the knee to Tommen, we shall do so. All we ask is that you spare our lives, and that you do not punish those loyal men who only serve their lord, as any knight must do." From the corner of her vision, Margaery saw Tyene and Oberyn exchange a glance. The hatred for House Lannister was strong among the Martells, but they, too, had fought to end the old cycle of murder. She knew they would not want a wholesale purge if it meant risking their own fragile position of power. Renewing a war with the entire Westerlands would profit no one, especially with winter looming on the horizon. She looked at her grandmother, then at her father, letting them sense her inclination. Olenna gave the barest dip of her head. Mace appeared relieved that his daughter was stepping forward to make the final pronouncement. This was part of the arrangement. Margaery needed to be seen as the moral center of the new regime. She turned back to Kevan Lannister. "Very well. Surrender your arms. Swear fealty to Tommen Baratheon, who remains the rightful king, and you shall be spared. The houses that rallied to the Lannisters will be required to pay reparations for the harm done to Dorne, as well as taxes to support the rebuilding of King's Landing." Kevan bowed his head. "We accept." The half-dozen men with him also sank to their knees, each bowing low. The hall was silent, lit by the flicker of torches and braziers. Margaery felt the tension crackle. A single misstep, a single word too harsh or too lenient, could unravel the delicate alliance. But for now, the solution held. Once the kneeling Lannisters were led away to make their oaths more formal, Olenna beckoned Margaery aside. "Do not think this ends the matter. Tywin himself is the real prize, and we must decide his fate with Doran's full council. If Doran insists on the mountain's death as retribution for Oberyn, well, that is one thing. But Tywin is the architect of so many horrors. The Martells will want his head, and perhaps your father will be too meek to deny them. We must consider how that looks for Tommen. The boy might not understand why his grandfather must die, or how it strengthens the realm. Margaery clasped her hands together to still the trembling. I know, grandmother. The next few days will be critical. We have a realm to hold together, not just a single city. I need to speak with Dorne soon. We must find a fair balance. Justice for Oberyn and Elia Martell, but not so savage that the Westerlands recoil in eternal hatred. Olenna smiled, a wry twist of her lips. You see now why I've always found court life exhausting. This is the game, child. You sit at the center of 1,000 hungry wolves and must feed them just enough so they don't devour you. She patted Margaery's arm. Go, tend to the boy king. Show him that we are not monsters like his mother claimed. Margaery acknowledged her grandmother's advice with a grateful nod, then left the throne room. Though the wound on her forearm still burned, she forced herself onward, determined to attend to Tommen. She found him in a guarded solar with Ser Loras. The boy king sat on a cushioned chair, staring despondently at the floor. A goblet of watered wine trembled in his hands, and his usual plump-cheeked innocence was subdued by the shadows beneath his eyes. Loras gave Margaery a sympathetic look, then quietly left the room to grant them privacy. Margaery approached her husband with gentle steps. Tommen, she said softly, how are you feeling? He did not raise his head. My mother tried to kill you. She knelt by his side, ignoring the pain in her arm. She was frightened. She feared losing you or losing power or... I don't know what goes on in her mind, Tommen. But I know she loves you in her own way. His lips quivered. When she was screaming at you, she said she'd kill me rather than let me be taken from her. His wide eyes, filled with tears, finally rose to hers. Does she hate me now? Margaery's heart ached at the terror in his voice. She laid a hand on his knee. No, Tommen. She was desperate, and she feared the worst. War makes people do awful things. I do not doubt she loves you, but she is ill with anger, and I think it's safer for everyone if she is kept guarded for a while. Tommen nodded, tears slipping down his cheeks. I want my mother back the way she used to be. Margaery smoothed his hair, as if comforting a younger sibling. I know, perhaps someday, if the madness leaves her. For now, though, you must be strong. The realm needs its king. A king who shows mercy and fairness, who can unite the people after so much violence. He swallowed hard. I don't feel strong. Grandfather always told me and Joffrey that a king must be decisive, must put fear in the hearts of his enemies. But I hate all this fighting. She gave him a gentle smile. There's more than one way to be a king. Fear can rule, yes, but so can kindness. And it's not weakness to choose mercy, as long as you protect those you serve. We will help you. You have my family's support and Prince Doran's. Dorne and the Reach are mighty indeed. He nodded but did not speak further, simply leaning his head against her. Margaery wrapped an arm around his shoulders, the way a mother or older sister might comfort a frightened child, wishing there were some way to shield him entirely from the ugliness of what was to come. The boy was still the rightful king, and that alone carried symbolic weight. But behind him now stood the Tyrell rose and the Martell spear, overshadowing the lion that once roared. She stayed with him until he drifted off into a fitful doze. Then she gently slipped away, leaving instructions with the guards and a maester to watch over him. She needed to see how the rest of the city fared, and she especially wanted to learn of Tywin Lannister's status. Though he was as formidable as any lord in Westeros, even he could not stand alone against the combined might of two great houses. Still, she doubted he would capitulate easily. Late that night, she heard the news. Tywin Lannister had been taken into custody without a final battle. A ring of Tyrell knights and Dornish cavalry had cornered him in a district near the Iron Gate. Forced to yield, Tywin had surrendered his sword but demanded safe conduct for his retinue. The Allied forces had given it so as not to risk a last, bloody skirmish in the streets. In the morning, the old lion would be brought to the Red Keep in chains. The realm would at last see Tywin Lannister at the mercy of the very families he had once subjugated. Margaery tried to sleep that night in the royal apartments. It was a restless slumber. She was half expecting nightmares of Cersei's dagger or horrifying visions of a king's landing in flames, reminiscent of Aerys Targaryen's final hours. But exhaustion won out. When she awoke at dawn, the day felt eerily quiet, as though the city itself held its breath for what was to come. She ate a small breakfast, mindful that many across King's Landing had little to eat at all. Supplies were tight after the chaos, but the Tyrell foragers were already distributing bread from the castle stores. By mid-morning, a hush fell over the Red Keep as the gates were drawn open for Tywin Lannister. Word of his arrival spread fast, and soon a small crowd of courtiers and soldiers gathered to see the once mighty hand of the king led in chains. Margaery stood on a balcony overlooking the main courtyard. Olenna was at her side, and Prince Doran Martell, arriving earlier than expected, carried in a wheelhouse from the southern outskirts of the city, sat in a specially placed seat, carefully observing from a vantage where he did not have to stand on his gout-ridden legs. Doran's face was impassive, his dark eyes scanning the courtyard with quiet intensity. He had insisted on making the final judgments about Tywin's fate personally, though he would not do so without consulting his allies. Next to Doran, Tyene Sand stood, arms folded, her expression grim. Nymeria and Obara lingered behind her. Their presence was a tangible reminder that Oberyn Martell was dead and that vengeance had driven them to this moment. From the main gate, a column of mounted Dornish and Tyrell knights rode in, escorting a single captive wagon. Red dust from the roads clung to the wagon's wheels. The watchers in the courtyard parted, forming a corridor for the prisoners' approach. Then the wagon halted, and out stepped Tywin Lannister. He wore no armor, only a simple black doublet smudged with dust. His normally sharp, steely gaze was subdued by defeat, but not, Margaery thought, by fear. Even in shackles, he managed to stand with a straight back. A hush spread through the onlookers. Tywin's name had once been spoken in reverent or fearful tones throughout the Seven Kingdoms. He had orchestrated the Red Wedding, crushed his foes with cunning, and ruled through intimidation. Now he stood alone, forced to face the consequences of his hunger for power. The guards led him forward, roughly but not viciously, up the steps of the courtyard until he was within shouting distance of Prince Doran. Olenna Tyrell gestured for quiet among the crowd. The only sounds were the rustle of banners in the breeze and the murmurs of a city on edge. Doran's voice, though soft, carried an authority that cut through the silence. Tywin of House Lannister, Lord of Casterly Rock, former hand of the king. You stand accused of repeated violations against the peace of the realm and specifically against House Martell. You sanctioned or covered up the murder of Elia Martell and her children, as well as the death of Prince Oberyn Martell. Your efforts to subjugate Dorne by economic sanctions threatened further bloodshed. Do you deny these charges? Tywin's jaw tightened. He did not lower his eyes, but he did not speak immediately. Finally, he said, I deny none of them, but I remind you, Prince Doran, that in war, many acts are committed that in peacetime would be considered crimes. I have served the realm's best interests in stamping out rebels and threats to the crown. A whisper rippled through the gathered watchers, some in condemnation, others in grim acknowledgement. Margaery wondered if Tywin believed these words, or if he was simply reciting a script to maintain dignity. Perhaps both. Doran did not flinch, though he took a moment to reach for a cane to adjust his posture in the seat. You speak of war's atrocities as if they are natural occurrences, like floods or drought. Yet you orchestrated them with a surgeon's hand. House Martell has lost far too much to your sense of the realm's best interests. Olenna Tyrell's voice, though quieter, now rose to join the conversation. Likewise, House Tyrell cannot forget how you used us as pawns, arranging marriages to secure your hold on the Iron Throne, treating us as second to Lannister power, even though it was our grain that fed this city. Your contempt was made plain again and again. Tywin turned his gaze to Olenna. You forget, Lady Olenna, that it was your own son who eagerly sought my favor, who marched alongside my forces. You were not forced into anything. Margaery's father, Mace, bristled at Tywin's words but remained silent in the background, as though uncertain how to respond to the accusation. Olenna simply gave Tywin a withering stare. Men can be flattered into foolishness, she replied. That does not absolve you of your crimes. Prince Doran nodded, then addressed Tywin again. By all rights, I could order your execution this very moment in recompense for Elia and Oberyn. My daughters demand your blood. He paused, letting that statement weigh heavily in the air, while Obara and Nymeria fixed Tyw in with merciless stares. But I must consider what is best for Dorne, what is best for the realm, and how to prevent further needless slaughter. If I kill you now, I fear your bannermen will never rest until they avenge you. The cycle of violence will continue. House Martell has always prided itself on our defiance in the face of tyranny, but we do not enjoy endless bloodshed. A ripple of tension went through the crowd. Margaery felt her heart pound. This was the moment that would define the new order. Would Doran choose an act of mercy or vengeance? Tywin's face remained expressionless, though Margaery suspected he was keenly aware that his life hung on Doran's decision. Finally, the prince spoke again carefully. You will stand trial for your crimes. We are no savages. A trial will be held here in King's Landing, presided over by King Tommen Baratheon in the presence of the High Septon and the leading lords of the land. The charges against you will be aired in full. House Martell will call forth witnesses. So may you, if any still wish to speak in your defense. At the trial's end, the king and his council will deliver a verdict. Tywin's shackles clinked as he shifted. And if I am found guilty? Doran's gaze was unflinching. Then we will craft a punishment befitting your crimes. Perhaps it will be death. Perhaps exile. Perhaps a life in a cell, far from the intrigues you relish. You will abide by that verdict. For the first time, Margaery saw a faint flicker of something like surprise in Tywin's eyes. He had likely expected a swift beheading or some variant of the violent ends he himself had meted out. Yet a fair and public trial with formal procedure might be more damning in the long run. It would strip him of his mystique and power, forcing him to stand as a man answering for his deeds. She wondered if he would try to manipulate the outcome, but with so many houses aligned against him, how could he? Tywin tilted his head in a half-nod. I will abide by the process, provided it is truly fair and not a farce for the sake of satisfying Dorne's rage. I only ask that my men be treated with dignity in the meantime. Doran looked to Olenna, who gave a curt nod. Then he turned back to Tywin. Very well. You shall have these guarantees. Thus ended Tywin Lannister's grand entrance into the new King's Landing. He was led off by a group of Tyrell men-at-arms and Dornish spearmen, escorted to a secure cell. The onlookers dispersed, some muttering in disappointment that they had not seen a swift execution, others seeming relieved that the city would be spared more violence. Margaery released a long breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The day was not over, but one critical piece of business was settled. Tywin would stand trial. She stepped away from the balcony and made her way carefully down the winding corridors to greet Prince Doran in person. Several Martell knights stood guard as the prince was helped from his seat. Though he leaned heavily on a cane, he met her with a cordial smile. Around him, the sand snakes hovered protectively. Your Grace, Doran said softly, nodding in greeting. We have come far from the day we first discussed our alliance in secret letters. Margaery inclined her head, mindful of the courtesy due a ruler in his own right. Indeed, Prince Doran, I am glad you arrived safely. Tyene Sand stepped forward, a grin pulling at her lips despite the gravity of the situation. My uncle could not resist witnessing Lord Tywin's fall, nor could we. Nymeria Sand, lithe and sharp-eyed, ran her fingers over the hilt of a curved dagger. Some in Dorne will clamor for us to be less merciful than a trial. They might think we have grown weak, but Uncle chooses to show the realm our honor. Dorne raised a hand to silence them. That is enough talk for now. We must see how the city fares. Oberyn once told me that King's Landing devours the unwary. We would be fools to think we have tamed it overnight. Margaery offered a slight smile, though she felt the weight of the city pressing down on her shoulders. Let us work together to restore order. My family has placed me in charge of feeding and securing the city. We have bread from the Reach, but the stockpiles won't last indefinitely. I hope the Prince's Pass and other routes to Dorne remain open for trade. We cannot let King's Landing starve before winter even comes. Dorne will supply what we can, Dorne said with a polite tilt of his head. Though our desert harvests are meager compared to the bountiful fields of the Reach, still, the Martells have resources that can help. Most importantly, we must set an example of governance, not of tyranny. We both sought to remove Lannister domination because it bred resentment and strife. If we rule no better, we will find ourselves in a similar predicament. Margaery nodded. Agreed. We must show leniency to those who yield, but also firmness against any further treachery. The next step is arranging the trial. The High Septon remains in the city. I will speak with him about convening a sacred court in the Great September of Baelor. Tommen will preside, though of course will seat the Lords of the Alliance as well. Oberyn Sand flicked her gaze between Margaery and her sisters. And what of Cersei? She remains locked away, yes? Will she not also stand trial? That matter is more delicate, Margaery admitted, recalling Tommen's tearful face. She committed acts that might be considered treason in resisting the rightful king's authority. But she was Queen Regent and Tommen's mother. We must proceed carefully, or else it looks as though we are persecuting the boy's family. If it soothes Dorne's sense of justice to also see her tried, I will not oppose it, but we must weigh Tommen's well-being. Right now, he is raw. We need him stable and secure on the throne. Nymeria Sand exhaled, crossing her arms. So the game continues, but with different pieces. Margaery gave a wry nod. Such is the nature of power in Westeros. But I assure you, I will not let Cersei roam free to cause more bloodshed. For the time being, she remains a prisoner. Should the lords or the people demand it, a trial might follow. Doran seemed satisfied with this for the moment. With a weary motion, he gestured for his attendants to help him move. Very well, we shall see what the morrow brings. We have done enough for one day. King's Landing is ours, for now. Let us see to the city's needs and solidify our alliance in the eyes of the people. And so began the work of rebuilding. Over the days that followed, Margaery saw more of Doran Martell's quiet leadership firsthand. He took up temporary quarters in the Red Keep alongside the Tyrell family. When he was strong enough to walk, he toured some of the worst-affected areas of King's Landing, bringing a calm presence that astonished onlookers. The city folk, who had known the Red Viper as their only real glimpse of Dornish royalty, beheld Doran's softer, more contemplative demeanor with some surprise. Yet his mere presence reminded them that Oberyn's death had been avenged, in a sense, by the toppling of Lannister supremacy. The Martell soldiers worked alongside the Tyrell men-at-arms to maintain order. They wore distinctive cloaks, burnt orange and deep red, emblazoned with the sun and spear, but they did not move through the streets with hostility. If anything, their disciplined approach showed a measure of respect for the city's inhabitants, though tensions occasionally flared. For every cautious gold cloak who cooperated, there was another who nursed a grudge. Still, Margaery's network of lady informants reported that the mood in the city was one of wary acceptance. The Lannisters, after all, had never been beloved, particularly after Joffrey's reign of cruelty. Tommen had always seemed gentler. The presence of the Tyrells, who had fed the city for years, offered a kind of reassurance. Each morning, Margaery checked on Tommen. He was slowly regaining some composure, though nightmares still plagued him. On one occasion, he asked her in a trembling whisper if she would stay with him so that he would not be alone in the night. She agreed, brushing aside any concerns about impropriety. He was her husband in name, though his youth was painfully obvious. She shared a solar with him, reading him stories of gallant knights and wise kings from an old tome, hoping to give him a sense of what a kinder monarchy could look like. He listened intently, sometimes murmuring that he did not feel brave enough to be a king. She told him that all kings must learn courage, that she herself had been scared many times in the last few weeks, and that they would face the future together. Meanwhile, Cersei remained locked in a tower suite with minimal comforts. She was allowed a maester and a single handmaiden, but no visitors except the guards. Rumor had it that she raged and threw objects at the walls, cursing Margaery, cursing the Martells, cursing her own father for letting the city fall. Margaery heard from Loras that Cersei had demanded the heads of the Tyrell guards who stood watch at her door. The guards, for their part, reported that Cersei sometimes wept uncontrollably, calling out for Joffrey and Myrcella. It was unclear if the Queen Mother's mind was coming undone or if she was merely employing theatrics, hoping to manipulate someone into freeing her. As for Jaime Lannister, his whereabouts were unknown. He had been at Riverrun, attempting to restore Lannister authority in the Riverlands, when the coup took place. Now that the news was spreading that King's Landing had fallen under Tyrell Martell control, his next move was anyone's guess. Margaery suspected he might try to rally Lannister bannermen in the Westerlands, or perhaps he would attempt some rescue mission for his father and sister. Either way, that threat loomed in the distance, a reminder that House Lannister was not yet fully crushed. Within a fortnight, the Great September of Baelor was prepared for Tywin Lannister's trial. The High Septon, an elderly man who had carefully navigated the shifting politics, agreed to oversee the religious sanctity of the proceedings. Tommen sat on the throne in the front of the Grand Sept, though flanked visibly by Margaery, Olenna, Prince Doran, and other high lords. Dozens of onlookers filled the pews, including some Lannister loyalists, Tyrell bannermen, and Martell nobility. Even the small folk were allowed to crowd into the upper balconies, eager to witness the spectacle. The realm had not seen such a high-profile trial since Tyrion Lannister's fiasco over Joffrey's murder, and ironically, now Tywin found himself in a similarly precarious position. The atmosphere was tense, hush only broken by whispering. Then, with ceremonial pomp, Tywin Lannister was led in. He no longer wore shackles, but 4 guards flanked him. His posture was stiff, his face blank. Margaery watched him from her seat near Tommen, noting how the lines on his face had deepened. He looked older, as if the burdens of the last weeks had added a decade. Still, the man's pride remained unbowed. His gaze was steady and cold, sweeping the assembled lords and ladies as though memorizing their faces for future retribution. The charges were read out by one of Prince Doran's lords: the murder of Elia Martell and her children, the murder of Prince Oberyn Martell, conspiracy to commit acts of war against Dorne via punitive sanctions, among many lesser accusations, spanning from the sack of King's Landing under the Mad King's downfall to more recent events. Tywin listened without reaction. Then, with a nod from the High Septon, he was permitted to speak in his defense. He did not deny that Elia had died during the sack, but he insisted he had never directly ordered the murder of her children. He pinned the blame on Gregor Clegane and Amory Lorch, calling them reckless brutes who took matters into their own hands. He asserted that Oberyn Martell's death was a trial by combat, a duel Prince Oberyn had chosen. As for the sanctions, he claimed they were normal political pressure to bring a recalcitrant region into line, not an act of war. The sept filled with murmurs, half outraged, half uncertain. It was an argument carefully crafted, one that absolved Tywin of direct guilt even if it admitted he had benefited from the results. Yet Prince Doran's side countered with multiple witnesses: men-at-arms who had heard the rumors that the mountain was unleashed on the Targaryen loyalists under Tywin's watch, scribes who had kept records of Tywin's letters urging a swift end to Targaryen get, and those who had overheard him vow retribution on Oberyn the moment he championed Tyrion Lannister. Margaery watched the High Septon's face shift from polite neutrality to unease, aware that the moral lines of this conflict were blurred. Yet the weight of evidence was mounting that Tywin at least abetted these crimes. In the midst of it all, Tommen sat white-faced, gripping the arms of his seat. Margaery patted his hand gently, trying to steady him. The boy was listening to the evidence that his own grandfather had orchestrated or welcomed so much brutality. How could a child reconcile that? The trial stretched on for 3 days, with various arguments, witness statements, and impassioned pleas. Tywin remained stoic, offering rationalizations but never outright contrition. By the final day, Prince Doran gave a measured statement on behalf of House Martell, expressing the torment endured by Elaya's kin, the rage ignited by Oberyn's brutal death, and the need for the realm to reject Tywin's brand of ruthless politicking. Olenna Tyrell, representing her house, spoke next, describing the hidden manipulations Tywin had used to subordinate the Tyrells. She concluded by saying, "This realm will not know peace unless we break the cycle of unstoppable men who believe themselves above the law." After hours of deliberation, the High Septon and the Advisory Council came to a verdict. Tywin Lannister was found guilty of abetting war crimes against House Martell and guilty of maliciously orchestrating acts that led to Oberyn's death, though the final blow was indeed struck by Gregor Clegane. Margaery could feel the air crackle with anticipation as Tommen was prompted to rise and pronounce sentence. The boy looked out at the sea of faces in the Great September. He was trembling visibly. Margaery placed her hand on his shoulder for support. His voice, though shaking, echoed through the sacred space. "Tywin Lannister, you have caused grievous harm to House Martell and to the peace of the realm. The court finds you guilty of abetting murder and treachery. Therefore, in the name of the Seven, I sentence you to—" He faltered, eyes darting to Margaery, then to Prince Doran. A hush fell. The boy looked like he might collapse. Margaery leaned in, whispering so quietly that none but him could hear. "You may show mercy, or you may choose otherwise. No one can make this choice but you." Tommen's gaze flickered to Tywin, who stood with a stony expression, not pleading but perhaps bracing himself. The boy king swallowed. "I sentence you to a life of exile," Tommen said at last, voice wavering. A gasp spread among the Sept watchers. "You shall be stripped of your lands, titles, and claim to Casterly Rock. You shall depart Westeros on a ship, never to return on pain of death. If you set foot on these shores again, your life is forfeit. The Westerlands shall choose a new leader among its lords, subject to the crown's approval. That is my decision." A wave of murmurs and cries swept the September. Some had expected an execution, others a lesser punishment. Margaery saw the reaction among the Martells. Oberyn looked furious, Tyene and Nymeria uncertain. Prince Doran studied Tommen with the calm neutrality of a man who had lived long in the realm of compromise. Olenna Tyrell's mouth twitched slightly, perhaps with relief. Killing Tywin might have martyred him to his bannermen. Exile would remove him without stirring the pot of vengeance even further. Tywin's face betrayed a flash of— was it grief? Acceptance? He bowed stiffly. "As you command, your grace." There was no apology, no final outburst. If anything, he wore the look of a man who had prepared for many possibilities. Exile was not the worst among them. The High Septon quietly declared the trial ended. Guards stepped forward to escort Tywin away while the crowd erupted into a storm of chatter. The Lannister lord was led through the Great September doors, head high. He did not look back. Margaery squeezed Tommen's hand. The boy was pale and perspiring. This had been a momentous choice, and she did not doubt it would be second-guessed. But for now it was done. Tywin Lannister would be shipped off to Essos or some distant land, severed from the seat of power he had coveted. House Martell would not have the satisfaction of his blood, but they would have the knowledge that he left Westeros in disgrace. The realm was spared another ugly spectacle of gore, and Tommen's reign, however uncertain, had begun on a note of reluctant mercy. Outside the Sept, Oberyn Sand confronted Prince Doran in a low voice. Margaery, standing nearby, could not help but overhear. "He deserves death, uncle. He orchestrated our aunt's murder. He let the mountain kill father. How can we let him sail away free?" Doran glanced at Margaery, then spoke gently to his niece. "He is not free. He is banished from the land of his birth, stripped of honor. And though he may live a few years longer, he will not do so in comfort. He has lost everything. Our victory must be tempered by wisdom. If we behead him, we only stir the embers of endless war. This way, we break the chain of violence. It is what Oberyn would have wanted. Obara sneered. You do not know that. Father was a man of action, not half measures. Tyene interjected softly. He was, but he also believed in cunning, and in living to fight another day. We have our vengeance in a form. Let it suffice. Nymeria stared at the sept doors for a long moment, then exhaled as though releasing her anger into the wind. Margaery felt a pang of sympathy for the sand snakes, whose father had died so gruesomely, his killer undefeated by mortal hand. In truth, Gregor Clegane's own mortal wounds had come from Oberyn's spear, but the mountain's fate remained uncertain. Word was that Qyburn had taken Gregor's dying body into some hidden laboratory at Cersei's behest, an endeavor now presumably abandoned. None had seen the mountain since the day of the trial by combat. If he still lived, he was nowhere to be found. In the days that followed, Tywin's exile was carried out swiftly. He was placed on a ship at King's Landing's harbor under heavy guard, given only a modest retinue of servants. Many onlookers jeered as he boarded. Others watched in silent awe as the man who once ruled half the realm with fear departed in disgrace. Margaery was not there to witness his final departure. She had chosen to remain in the Red Keep, comforting Tommen, who was racked with guilt for sentencing his own grandfather to a fate worse than death in his eyes. As the sails vanished on the horizon, so too did the last vestige of Lannister might in the capital. The next challenge was ensuring that the Westerlands did not immediately revolt. The seat of Casterly Rock had effectively become vacant. Kevan Lannister, as the next in line, was offered the chance to lead if he swore fealty to Tommen and recognized the new alliances. Kevan, perhaps resigned to the situation, accepted. Margaery understood that giving the Lannisters a figurehead might help placate them, so long as that figurehead cooperated with the crown. The Golden Lion would not vanish from Westeros entirely, but it would now be a subordinate presence, overshadowed by the Rose and the Sun. A more pressing matter was the question of who truly guided the Iron Throne. Tommen was a boy of 9, reeling from personal trauma. By law and tradition, he should have a regent. Yet his mother was in no condition to serve, and Tywin was gone. Margaery's father, Mace, clamored for the position, but Prince Doran's influence was considerable. After debate among the small council and senior lords, a compromise emerged. A dual regency, shared between Mace Tyrell and Prince Doran Martell, until Tommen turned 16. This arrangement was almost unprecedented, but so was the alliance that had overthrown the Lannisters. Each man would hold partial oversight of the king's decisions, preventing either from accruing absolute power. And, behind them both, Olenna Tyrell and Margaery would continue to pull strings, ensuring a smoother governance than either man might manage alone. Doran agreed to remain in King's Landing for a time to solidify the new regime. He dispatched messages to Dorne, summoning his heir Trystane Martell to court to learn the ways of power. The Reach Lords stationed a considerable garrison in the city, both to guard the throne and to handle day-to-day policing. Meanwhile, Margaery resumed her charitable works, distributing bread in the poorer districts and commissioning basic repairs. She knew that hearts and minds in King's Landing could be swayed by tangible actions. If she kept the city fed and safe, the people might soon look upon her as a benevolent queen. Better that, she thought, than follow Cersei's path of intimidation. There remained, of course, the matter of Cersei's fate. Some clamored for her to be tried as well, but with Tywin gone and Tommen traumatized, Margaery and Olenna convinced Prince Doran to wait. Cersei had lost her power base and was effectively a hostage. If she posed no immediate threat, it might be wiser to let her remain in captivity until Tommen was ready to decide how to handle her. Perhaps she could be quietly sent to Casterly Rock under Kevan's watch, or left in the keep to live out a quiet retirement. No formal charges had been filed yet, though Doran did wonder if the Martells should demand her punishment for bringing Gregor Clegane to the trial by combat. In the end, for the sake of the alliance, he yielded to Margaery's counsel of caution. Day by day, a semblance of normalcy returned to the capital. The markets reopened, the guilds resumed work, and ships from the Reach arrived bearing grain and supplies, greeted with cheers. Tyrell gold was spent freely on public works, though the question of how to finance the future still loomed. The crown's debts were enormous, especially to the Iron Bank of Bravos. Margaery dreaded the day Braavosi envoys would arrive, demanding repayment. For now, the focus remained on immediate recovery. Tommen tentatively held court sessions, flanked by Mace Tyrell and Prince Doran, with Margaery standing just behind him. He offered clemency to minor lords who had fought on the Lannister side, provided they took new oaths. He granted small petitions to the common folk, often turning to Margaery for guidance. She coached him to listen compassionately, to appear approachable. The boy tried his best, though he was easily overwhelmed by the swirl of courtiers. Many nights, Margaery would find him curled up in bed with a cat one of her ladies had given him, seeking solace in the purring companion. Each time, she'd stroke his hair and tell him he was doing well, that the realm needed him to keep growing stronger. In her heart, she knew how delicate his position was, and how vital it was to show that the monarchy could still stand for something other than oppression. One afternoon, after a long session of court, Margaery met privately with Prince Doran and Olenna. They gathered in a small solar adorned with fresh flowers and an ornate rug. Doran sat in a carved wooden chair, massaging his gout-stricken leg, while Olenna perched on a cushioned bench, cane resting at her side. Margaery stood, her expression intent. "We have stabilized King's Landing," she began, clasping her hands before her. "But the rest of the 7 kingdoms remain unsettled. The north is in chaos after the Red Wedding, the Riverlands are half in ruin, the Vale stands aloof, and the Iron Islands continue their raids unchecked. If we leave them too long, we risk fracturing the realm anew." Prince Doran inclined his head. "We must confirm alliances or at least open negotiations with each region. The Tyrell armies are strong, but our men cannot occupy every corner of Westeros, especially not if winter is coming." Olenna tapped her cane against the rug. "The area is ruled by that silly boy, Robin Arryn, with Peter Baelish pulling the strings. The Vale has been quiet, but who knows where Littlefinger's ambitions might lead. And the north, House Bolton claims dominion through their savage betrayal of the Starks, but rumor has it they're not secure. The Ironborn plague their coasts, Stannis Baratheon is rumored to be at the Wall, and the wildlings roam. We should be cautious about sending troops that far." Margaery nodded. "We might not need to send troops immediately if we can negotiate. Perhaps we can arrange a truce or alliance with the Vale, or even restore order in the Riverlands by supporting Edmure Tully. We must show we are not simply conquerors, but guardians of the realm, if we expect loyalty." Prince Doran's eyes flicked thoughtfully to Margaery. "You speak as a true queen. Are you prepared for the challenges that come with this role? Tommen is young. Many in Westeros will look to you, to House Tyrell, and to me to set the tone. If we fail, the realm may break apart again." Margaery took a breath, feeling the weight of that responsibility. "I am prepared to do whatever it takes to hold this alliance together and bring peace. If that means forging new pacts, so be it. And if it means punishing rebellious lords, so be it. I only hope we can avoid further slaughter." Doran smiled faintly. "Then let us begin. We will dispatch envoys to each region. The North, the Vale, the Stormlands, the Riverlands, the Westerlands under Kevan Lannister, and the Iron Islands. We will invite them to King Tommen's coronation, an event to publicly reaffirm the new monarchy." Olenna nodded, her expression shrewd. "A coronation, indeed. The boy was never properly crowned after Joffrey's death. The ceremony we had was rushed and overshadowed by tragedy. A grand affair might give the realm a sense of renewed stability." Margaery thought of how Joffrey's wedding feast had ended in poison and death, how overshadowed Tommen's initial coronation had been. Perhaps a new coronation, one that invited the entire realm to gather, could indeed serve as a symbol of fresh beginnings. "We will plan it carefully. We must ensure security, provide spectacles to delight the crowds, and maybe even arrange some beneficial betrothals. The alliances formed at a coronation feast can last a generation." They agreed to set the coronation in 2 months' time, giving lords a chance to travel. Meanwhile, they would stay vigilant for any rebellious stirrings. The War of the Five Kings had taught them that none of the great houses could be underestimated, nor could the realm endure endless conflict without collapsing. When Margaery departed that meeting, she went to find Tommen. She discovered him in the royal gardens, playing with the cat while a pair of Kingsguard looked on. He looked up with a small smile when she arrived, though worry still lingered behind his eyes. "Margaery," he said, standing and brushing off his tunic, "am I going to have a real coronation, like the ones in the old stories?" She nodded, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder. "Yes, sweet king. We will have a grand ceremony in the great September, and all the lords and ladies of the realm will come to swear fealty. This will be our chance to show them a new age of peace is at hand." He gazed at the cat in his arms. "I'm scared. What if something bad happens again, like at my brother's wedding?" Margaery gently stroked the cat's ears. "We will take every precaution to keep you safe. I know the memory of what happened to Joffrey is frightening, but trust me, you are surrounded by people who want you well, my brother Loras in the Kingsguard, my grandmother Prince Doran, and me. Nothing will be left to chance." He drew a breath, trying to summon courage. "All right, if it helps bring peace, then I'll do it." She smiled. "That's the spirit of a true king, and you won't be alone. I will be at your side." As Tommen bent to release the cat onto the soft grass, Margaery felt a glimmer of hope. It was possible, she realized, for a Kinder monarchy to emerge from the ashes of Lannister rule. She thought of Oberyn Martell, proud and passionate, and how his death had brought House Martell and House Tyrell together in an alliance that once would have seemed impossible. She recalled the moment she had first resolved to reach out to Dorne, forging a pact so delicate that it had nearly been discovered. And here they were, lions overthrown, the capital secured, the boy king perched like a delicate blossom in a garden of roses and spears. The city that once cowered under Joffrey's cruelty now saw the banners of the Reach and Dorne flying from its walls. She knew that the tasks ahead were monumental. Winter would come soon enough, and with it new threats. The north was unresolved. The Iron Islands, under the ruthless Victarion or Euron Greyjoy, reports varied, remained a wild card. Bravos would eventually demand the crown's debts. The Vale might remain in uneasy isolation, Littlefinger spinning webs of intrigue. And who knew if another Targaryen pretender might rise across the narrow sea. But for now, the realm had a chance. A chance to heal from the nightmares that had plagued it since Robert Baratheon's rebellion, from the horrors of the War of the Five Kings. If Margaery had any say, the people of Westeros would see an era of relative peace, guided not by the iron fist of a lion but by a partnership of rose and sun. In the following weeks, the city's mood steadily improved. Workmen repaired roads and the scorched buildings from the brief fighting. The docks teemed with new trade, as the caravels from the Reach arrived with grain and goods, while smaller ships from Dorne brought spices, olives, and citrus. Street performances and small festivals popped up, financed discreetly by Tyrell gold. The small folk, after years of terror, discovered the odd feeling of walking at night without bracing for a gold cloak's baton or a band of roving brutes. Crime did not vanish, of course, but the watch under Tyrell Martell oversight was less brutal than it had been under the Lannisters' heel. To tighten the sense of stability, Prince Doran carefully orchestrated a series of letters inviting the surviving Stark and Tully loyalists in the Riverlands to attend Tommen's coronation. He offered them pardons if they would lay down arms. Some might see it as a trap, but Doran made no threatening statements. He promised safe passage guaranteed by the combined armies of the Reach and Dorne. The idea, which Margaery supported, was to bring warring factions to the table and unify them in a new court. Whether the Riverlords would accept remained unclear. Meanwhile, in the Westerlands, Kevan Lannister wrote back with guarded acceptance of Tommen's rule. He promised to attend the coronation with a modest retinue. He had no choice. He needed the crown's goodwill to maintain his position at Casterly Rock. The Lannister bannermen were restless, fuming over Tywin's exile, but they had no single champion to rally around, especially with Jaime absent. Kevan's letters were polite enough, though Margaery sensed bitterness in every line. Little by little, preparations for the coronation reached a fever pitch. The great September of Baelor was scrubbed clean, new white marble from the Reach commissioned for steps that had cracked. Jewelers prepared a new crown for Tommen, more modest than Joffrey's but still bearing images of both the Stag of Baratheon and the Lion of Lannister. Some argued that the Rose of Tyrell should be included, or even the Sun and Spear, but Margaery decided that might be too brazen. Better to preserve a sense of continuity for the monarchy, acknowledging Tommen's paternal lines, while letting the new alliances shine in other ways. As the day of the coronation approached, dignitaries began to arrive. Many lords from the Reach, including House Tarly, House Rowan, House Hightower, and others, marched in with banners flying, filling the streets with color. Dornish lords such as House Dane, House Fowler, and House Ironwood also came, each greeted warmly by Prince Doran. One bright morning, a party from the Vale arrived, led by Peter Baelish, now styling himself Lord Protector of the Vale, and the young Lord Robin Arryn. Littlefinger's presence set Margaery on edge. The man had a cunning gleam in his eye that reminded her of Varys or Tyrion. She did not doubt he had his own angle. Still, it was better to have him inside the gates, where she could watch him, than conspiring from afar. What surprised many was the arrival of Edmure Tully, newly released from Frye custody. Word spread that the Freys, uncertain how to handle the new power structure, had let Edmure go in a desperate attempt to curry favor with the crown. Margaery suspected a Lannister-Frye alliance was all but dead now that Tywin was in exile, and the Freys were scurrying for cover. Edmure arrived with his pregnant wife, Roslyn. They looked worn and wary, but the small folk who remembered the Tully name cheered at the gates. Margaery made a point of welcoming Edmure personally, ensuring that he felt included in the new realm. If House Tully pledged fealty to Tommen anew, the Riverlands might start to mend. The day before the coronation, Margaery found herself standing on a balcony with Prince Doran, surveying the city. A throng of peasants pressed at the edges of the square outside the Red Keep, eager for the next day's festivities. Vendors sold cups of sweet wine, fresh bread, and Dornish peppers. Minstrels played lively tunes. The sun was dipping over the rooftops in a haze of pink and orange, reminiscent of Dorne's sunsets. Margaery wore a gown of pale green that picked up the warm glow of dusk. Doran, robed in a deep burgundy with gold accents, leaned heavily on the railing. "The city is at peace for now," Margaery remarked. Doran nodded. "A fragile peace. But it is more than we had when Oberyn fell. I think my brother would be pleased to see us forging alliances instead of letting the realm bleed." She glanced at him. "I am sorry about Oberyn. He was such a unique presence at court. I often wonder how different things might have been if he had lived." Doran's face tightened momentarily with grief. Then he exhaled. He made his choices. He embraced that trial by combat with all the brash confidence he possessed. I only wish he could see how his death changed the course of history. It united us, House Tyrell and House Martell. There is a certain irony in that. Margaery leaned on the balcony, letting the cooling air brush her cheeks. Irony indeed, and now we stand poised to crown Tommen anew. Your niece and nephews will witness it, along with my father and so many others. The king's reign must be a sign of hope. Doran tapped his cane. That is my hope too. We have a long road ahead. But for the sake of Dorne, of the Reach, of all of Westeros, we must try. Late that night, the final touches were placed in the great September. Margaery walked the aisles by candlelight, checking that the seating was arranged, that the banners of Baratheon, Tyrell, and Martell hung in harmonious balance, that the altar was bedecked with flowers. She spoke with the High Septon, who murmured prayers for a peaceful ceremony. When she finally returned to her chambers, she found Tommen already asleep, curled beneath a thick blanket, the cat purring at his feet. She stood by his bedside for a moment, studying his boyish features. Tomorrow, he would be crowned in front of the realm's greatest lords. He was too young for such a burden, and yet, if guided properly, perhaps he could become the decent king Westeros sorely needed. The coronation day dawned bright and clear, a stroke of luck considering the approaching autumn. Trumpets rang out in the streets, and ribbons of green and gold fluttered from parapets. Margaery dressed in a flowing gown of ivory and gold thread, her hair in an elaborate arrangement pinned with small jeweled roses. Olenna fussed, ensuring every stitch was perfect. When at last Margaery stepped outside, the courtyard erupted in cheers. She was ushered into a grand carriage with Tommen, who wore a new doublet emblazoned with the Baratheon stag. He seemed overwhelmed by the crowds, but she took his hand and smiled reassuringly. They traveled through the city to the Great September, escorted by a procession of knights from the Reach and Dorne. People threw petals on the streets, shouting blessings for the king and his queen consort. Some called out Margaery's name in adoration, praising her generosity. Others invoked Oberyn Martell's memory, chanting "Justice for Dorne," but the mood was largely jubilant. Beneath the dread and war-weariness, the common folk craved a reason to celebrate. Inside the Great September, it was a blaze of candlelight and color. Lords and ladies filled the pews, arranged by region. Peter Baelish sat with Robin Arryn, the boy valiantly trying not to fidget. Kevin Lannister and a small retinue of Westerland's lords looked tense, but not antagonistic. Edmure Tully stood near the front, wearing a somber expression yet clapping politely. Prince Doran was given a place of high honor, accompanied by Tyene, Nymeria, and Obara. The Highgarden lords beamed at Margaery, especially Randall Tarly, who had come to respect her political acumen, if not always her father's. Olenna sat in a prime seat, cane across her lap, looking every inch the regal matriarch. As the High Septon began the ceremony, Margaery stood at Tommen's side before the altar. The young king knelt reverently as the rituals commenced. Prayers to the seven, blessings upon the monarchy. Then came the solemn moment of crowning. The High Septon lifted the new crown, ringed with subtle antlers and a single lion's head motif at the front. In front of all assembled, he lowered it onto Tommen's fair hair and intoned, "Behold Tommen of the House Baratheon, the first of his name, King of the Undulls, the Rhoynar, and the First Men, Lord of the Seven Kingdoms and Protector of the Realm." A roar of applause and cheers echoed through the Great September. Margaery felt tears pricking her eyes, thinking of how precarious this had been, how close they had come to losing everything to the Lannisters. Now the boy at her side was crowned anew, not as a puppet of Tywin or Cersei, but as a figurehead for a fragile alliance determined to steer Westeros toward peace. Tommen stood, cradling the crown on his brow with a trembling hand. He turned to the assembled crowd and spoke in a halting voice, though the sincerity shone through. "Lords and ladies of Westeros, I accept this crown in humility and gratitude. I pledge to protect the realm, to uphold justice, and to bring peace after these years of strife. Please join me in building a future free of the wars that have torn us apart." A wave of sympathetic cheers followed. Margaery and Tommen then approached each of the seven altars, lighting a candle at each. When the ceremony ended, the High Septon led them from the sept, and the crowd surged in the streets to follow the royal entourage back toward the Red Keep for the celebratory feast. Inside the keep's grand hall, tables groaned under the weight of lavish dishes. Roast swan, honey-glazed ham, spiced Dornish peppers, lemon cakes from the arbor, fresh fruit from the Reach. Wine flowed freely, arbor gold, Dornish reds, and even fine mead from the Riverlands. Musicians played a triumphant melody. Laughter and conversation filled the air, a stark contrast to the gloom that had hung over King's Landing for so long. Yet even amid the revelry, Margaery remained vigilant. She moved among the guests, charming them with her smile, ensuring that petty rivalries were defused before they escalated. She introduced Edmure Tully to some of the Dornish lords, hoping to facilitate alliances or at least cordial relations. She politely engaged Peter Baelish, who offered smooth compliments that made her skin crawl. She expressed her condolences to Kevin Lannister for the family's hardships, graciously omitting the details of Tywin's trial. Behind her, Loras and the other Kingsguard kept watch, scanning the crowd for threats. At one point, Margaery found herself dancing with Tommen before all the assembled lords, a symbolic moment to show the unity of king and queen. Though the boy was shy and unsure of the steps, Margaery guided him gently. The crowd applauded, She whispered in his ear, "You're doing wonderfully," and saw a small grin break across his face. She thought of how different a spectacle this was from Joffrey's wedding, which had ended in horror. Later, she switched partners, dancing with a Dornish lord, then with her father, each time making polite conversation about the realm's future. She glimpsed Prince Doran seated at a table with Olenna, the two conferring in low voices. A sense of partnership radiated from them, despite their differences in temperament. As the feast wore on, jugglers performed, bards sang bawdy songs. Fire eaters from Dorne, hired by Tyene, astounded the crowd with spectacular displays. The mood was jubilant, the tension that had choked the city finally easing into something like genuine celebration. Margaery felt relief and a cautious optimism. Perhaps she dared to hope this alliance might hold. Perhaps they had a real chance at forging a stable realm. A realm not ruled by Lannister cruelty, but by a coalition that respected each region's dignity. The Martells had their justice, the Tyrells their due influence, and Tommen a supportive regency that did not isolate him. Toward the end of the night, the great hall grew warm with body heat and candle smoke. Margaery stepped onto a balcony to catch her breath. She leaned against the stone balustrade, letting the cool air brush her face. In the courtyard below, she saw flickering torches as the city guard patrolled. Farther off, the roofs of King's Landing spread under a starry sky. The flicker of lights in windows spoke of a populace that, for once, might be resting without dread of immediate violence. She closed her eyes, thinking of the day Prince Oberyn had died, how that moment had sparked her realization that the Lannisters would destroy anything and anyone without remorse. She had gambled everything on forging a secret pact with Dorne, risking her family's position, risking her own life. Now, months later, she stood on a balcony overlooking a capital she and her allies had seized. With Tommen crowned anew, Tywin gone, Cersei locked away. The difference was staggering, almost surreal. A soft voice at her shoulder startled her. "Penny for your thoughts, my queen?" She turned to see Tyene Sand, holding a goblet of wine. The young Dornish woman looked at her with a curious tilt of her head. Margaery smiled faintly. "I was just reflecting on how far we've come, and how strange it feels to be here, celebrating." Tyene nodded, stepping closer to the balustrade. "My father would have loved a feast like this. He was always the life of any gathering, full of stories and jests. Yet his memory lingers in every cup of Dornish red I drink." Margaery hesitated, then placed a hand lightly on Tyene's arm. "He left a legacy, Tyene, one that helped unite our houses in a way we never imagined." Tyene's voice softened. "True enough. You were the first person here to offer us genuine friendship after my father's death. You risked your own status for it. I won't forget that." Margaery felt a surge of warmth at the words. "Thank you. Sometimes I still wonder if it was the only path. So much blood has been spilled over the years." Tyene looked out at the city lights. "We are no strangers to blood in Dorne, but perhaps we can finally have an alliance that does more than trade threats. I, for one, would like to see the wounds close." They stood in companionable silence for a time, sipping wine and gazing at the softly glowing city. Below, a pair of musicians wandered the courtyard, serenading a small group of courtiers. The tune floated up to the balcony, sweet and lilting. Tyene eventually broke the hush. "So many challenges remain, yes, but I can't help feeling hopeful. And I think that's because of you, Margaery Tyrell. You showed us that alliances can be built on shared pain, turned into something stronger." Margaery's cheeks flushed. "I had help from my grandmother, from Loras, from your uncle. And Oberyn gave us reason to question everything we took for granted." Tyene smiled. "My sisters and I don't always agree, but we share one thought. If father's death had to happen, at least it sparked a change. Perhaps that is the best we can do for him. Build a better realm on the ashes of the old." Margaery stared into the dark. "A better realm, yes. That is what we must strive for. I only pray the lords of Westeros will see reason and not drag us back into war." Tyene's eyes gleamed in the moonlight. "If they do, We shall meet them with roses and spears united. They'll discover the lion wasn't the only beast to fear. Margaery took a final sip of wine, letting its warmth spread through her. Then let this night be a promise to do everything we can, from this moment on, to uphold that dream. A realm of peace, or at least as close to peace as we can manage in these harsh lands. They raised their cups, an unspoken toast. Then, hearing the distant laughter from the hall, they slipped back inside to rejoin the festivities. The coronation feast continued late into the night, a swirl of music and dancing, of political whispers and fragile hope. Margaery found Tommen nodding off amid the merriment, gently carried away by a Kingsguard to his chambers. She herself stayed a while longer, exchanging pleasantries and forging new acquaintances among the gathered lords. Every word, every smile, every subtle promise was a thread in the tapestry of alliances she needed to weave if the Tyrell Martell hegemony was to stand. At last, near dawn, she took her leave. Drifting through the corridors of the Red Keep, she found her grandmother nodding by a pillar, half asleep on her cane. Olenna jerked awake when Margaery approached. "Is it over, child?" she mumbled, a wry grin tugging at her lips. "I haven't been to a feast that raucous since the old king's time." Margaery smiled and steadied Olenna's arm. "Yes, grandmother, it's over. Let's get you to rest. We have much to do when the sun rises." Olenna patted her granddaughter's hand. "So we do. You've done well, Margaery. Better than I hoped. Perhaps we can make something good out of this wretched city." They walked together through the dim corridors, passing the shadows of Tyrell guards and Martell spearmen on patrol. The Iron Throne lay beyond the hall, silent in the gloom, no longer overshadowed by a golden lion's banners. In that hush, Margaery felt the enormity of what she had set in motion. She had defied the Lannisters, toppled their dominion, and brokered a pact with Dorne. No single act of retribution, no single marriage arrangement, no single cunning letter had achieved this alone. It had been a web of bravery and compromise, of listening and cajoling and risking. It had been a gamble that might still fail if the realm lurched back into discord. But for now it held. And so Margaery Tyrell, queen consort to the boy king, partner to House Martell, champion of a new regime, took a final breath of the sweet night air. Outside, the sky brightened with the faintest hints of dawn. A new day was coming for Westeros, uncertain yet filled with promise. She closed her eyes for a moment, thinking of all who had died to bring them here. Then she guided her grandmother onward, her footsteps echoing in the corridors of power. Tomorrow, she would face the tasks of forging new alliances with the Vale, the North, and beyond. Tomorrow, she would hear the petitions of men who once served the Lannisters. Tomorrow, she would check on Tommen's well-being, reassure him that he was on the right path. Tomorrow, she would continue building the realm that she had dared to imagine when she first reached out to Dorne in secret. But for tonight, in the pre-dawn hush, she allowed herself a moment of quiet satisfaction that the rose and the sun had indeed triumphed over the lion, at least for a time, and that a gentle boy now wore the crown, guided by those who sought something kinder and more enduring than the endless Game of Thrones. She and Olenna disappeared into the depths of the Red Keep, leaving behind the echo of laughter and music that still lingered from the coronation feast, and stepping toward the uncertain, yet hopeful future they had wrought.